stuff?
But no, not yet.
Well, it sounded like it was totally soundproof. What are you doing, bro?
Press and record.
I'm like, yeah, but like if you're pointing over there,
Well, normally I have it pointing here, and then you use that board, and you can't
and
do
then I
both.
just, yeah, but I want you to point it where I'm not at. So I want to keep.
Where you're not at?
Okay, dude, whatever makes you happy.
Well, it's not what makes me. Okay.
Okay, so next week, Isabel. Yes, Candy said what?
I got 13 and supplemental 2. You said 3.
What?
Dude, when? Next week? What was supposed to be the reading this week? This week the reading was supposed to be chapter 6.
7, 8, or 12.
And 11.
No. 7, 8.
No, no,
7, 8.
We are delayed.
7, 8, 11?
the original, 7, 8, 12.
Okay. Last week we had chapters 7, 8, and 12 assigned. I said if you haven't finished reading them, save them. We'll go over them next week. That next week is this week. That's today. So what is in the syllabus that was reading for next week? Okay. You're looking at a little papelito. Okay? If you're gonna force me to go, you're gonna force me to go and open up the syllabus, and we'll take a look at it. Let's see. Does it see me?
Can we look it up in Canvas?
No, you can't look it up in Canvas.
Diligent shit. This one.
I got 13 and 2.
Kenny, if you made me waste my time on this, I'm going to be upset. If you're right, I will apologize profusely, but if you made me waste my time. So as Kenny was saying, the reading for this week is chapter 13 and supplemental 2.
So the apology?
Is it accepted? Okay, so for this coming week, you need to read chapters 13 and supplemental 2. Okay? Which are insolvency and bankruptcy, a primer on CMBSs, and we'll spend some time on that, okay? So don't forget to do that, because I will bring material from outside the text that I've accumulated in the past on those topics, okay? Today we're going to go over diligence, okay? We're going to go over diligence. We're going to go very slowly over diligence because I think it's important, okay? And I think at some point in our lives, in our careers, whether it's real estate or otherwise, we're going to buy or sell a business or an asset, and it's going to be important for us to understand the things that we should look at when we're doing that. And even when you're selling an asset, it's important to understand what a buyer's going to look at. So, what happens when you sell your house? If you want to sell your house, what do?
You get everything fixed, make it look pretty.
Make it look pretty, right? You put the lipstick on the pig, right? You make it look really nice. So when you're selling a business, or when you're selling a commercial real estate asset, it's not just painting it at times. Sometimes, you know, there are times to sell and times not to sell. So when you look at if people are buying cash flow, what does your lease structure look like? And based on that lease structure, there's going to be, you know, more appropriate time to sell or not, and you'll maximize value. We'll talk a little bit about that, okay? So today we're going to, I always bring some current stuff, and the bulk of what I spend on current stuff today is really an offshoot of diligence. So I just want to bring some, what I think is relevant market information, but I'll bring it in the context of one of the steps that you would naturally do in a diligence process. So I'll try to link those two. We'll talk a little bit, so we'll have a quiz and then we'll go over diligence. We'll have a quiz on that, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back. I'll do a brief review of the videos, and I say brief, I can't say that I'm ecstatic about the viewership. I'm not looking for ratings. Nielsen doesn't follow me, but it does help. It does help, and you know, as far as I'm dismayed at times is, you know, as of late last night, half the class hadn't looked at the videos, and that's okay. I mean, it's there to learn. The other half makes me happy because I know a lot of those are arduously following along, and whether they capture everything or not, they're learning, and that's what the whole concept, and that's what it's all about. Am I learning, right? And that's really what. Am I going to get something from here that one day down the line is going to give me an advantage at a job or for a job, or, you know, in something that I'm doing, okay? And then now, so we'll go over some of what the videos, there were brief videos, it was barely an hour this week. And then we'll have an in-class assignment, okay? That'll flow off of that. Okay? All right. Where's the 10-year treasury?
1.933.
Yeah, 1.94, I heard. Where was it last week? Cole, where was it last week?
Oh, the treasury?
Uh-huh.
I think it was like 1.7.
Okay. Any more precise number? I like that technique though. When you're not quite there, you repeat the question to like sort of gather, you sort of gather yourself. So let me see. What you're trying to understand is what the treasury rate was last week.
Some buffer.
Is that's okay? So you try to get some validation. You're going, okay. I think it was like 1.72 or something like that. Okay. So is that a big move or is that a little move?
I think it's kind of big, yeah.
You think it's kind of big?
In relation to the treasury, like, it's very, you know, a small number, but
It's 20 basis.
So it's 20 basis points, but out of 170 basis point, that's a pretty significant move. Okay, we're seeing a lot more volatility in interest rates than we've seen historically. Okay, so a lot of that just may have to do with uncertainty or not. And along those lines, one of the things that this is from this newsletter that I get that is incredibly pessimistic, but I love reading it, and it's a lot of it's a credit-driven newsletter that I get. It's called Grant's Interest Rate Observer, and it was actually a gift from a former student. You know, I just sort of got it one day, and I've been a loyal subscriber since. I mean, they got a chart here that talks about spread between BBB rated notes and AAA rated notes. Now, do we know what ratings are on notes?
truthfully, when I started reading the textbook, I thought I was talking about the Better Business Bureau for so long. And then I realized,
BBB, then
yeah,
you
like I was
realize
reading
has
it in
nothing
my
to do
head
with
as
the
Better
BBB.
Business Bureau, and then I got to the point I was like, oh, it means a triple B bond. Like,
It's the credit rating, right?
Yeah, who issues credit ratings?
Moody's, Finch, Standards and Poor's.
So there's I forget how many are left now, but there's about 9 or 10 credit agent. They're about, would you like to tell the class, Isabel, or? You would? Okay, how many credit rating agencies are there? Are you gonna repeat the question? Maybe that might get you. Okay, guys, it's hard to speak over the class sometimes. I'm trying to be calm today. I haven't had my hot chocolate. I'm trying to
Can you do that? Can you?
try to slow it down a little bit. So, okay, I don't know if you've noticed. So, but there are primarily three Moody's, S&P, and Fitch are the three big ones. Okay.
what does S&P stand for?
Standard and Poor's. And so this is publicly traded. This is part of McGraw-Hill, which is publicly traded. Fitch is part of some French outfit, which I think it's called Veritas, and they may be publicly traded. I don't know. There's some other ones. But these do like 95% of the ratings out there. So in the context of financial statements, there are audit firms, there are audit firms that issue opinions on financial statements. I don't teach the accounting class anymore, so I'm not going to get into that, but there are external accounting firms that come in and review financial statements and provide an opinion on them so that the investors at least have an understanding of the work that was done and the opinion that the external accountants have on the financial statement. In the context of debt in particular, there is no opinion that an accountant can give on debt, and so there are specialized agencies that issue a company's cash flow and issue an opinion on them. And more than an opinion, it's a rating, okay? They'll provide a rating, and their rating ultimately talks to a company's ability to service the cash flow associated with that obligation, okay? Now, it could be that if I want to buy bonds, I could hire a company to come in and review the debt or the financial statements or the underlying financial condition of a company. But it would be very difficult to do it. So the way it works is the company that's going to issue debt will engage these entities, okay, to issue a report and to, on an ongoing basis, provide additional information on their credit to the world. there's an inherent conflict there, because if you're paying somebody to issue an opinion on you, you're saying, you know, how independent can they really be? There was a big issue in 2007, 2008, especially in the real estate industry, especially in things like securitized debt and collateralized debt obligations. We'll talk a little bit about that next week, in the ratings that were being issued, and the sort of the guidance that was being provided versus what the real underlying economics were. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. But so each one of these has a different rating. I've got a I won't bring it, it's for a different class, but I took the time to overlay the 3 different big ones and how they're different ratings compared to one another. So AAA is an S&P. I forget the Moody's one. You know, Moody's is like A, big A and 2 little A's or something like that. Okay, and so, but there is a specific section in which it all drops off, right? So you know, you go, you know, A, double A, right? A, you know, B, double B, triple B. Okay, but there's a cutoff, and then you get to like C, double C, 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 C. Okay. And so this line is what's called, that's the line where you separate investment grade bonds from speculative bonds. And by charter, most investors, institutional investors, endowments, pension funds, etc., cannot invest in speculative grade obligations. Banks definitely cannot invest in speculatively rated obligations. And BBB happens to be the lowest of the investment grade levels. Okay? Now, I've given you this whole explanation. It has nothing to do with this little chart I was going to say. But, you know, some people like to track the spread that exists between AAA and BBB. And why would people want to do that? I mean, there's more risks there, right? The lower you go down the pile, you know, the rating, there should be more risk, right? And so, you know, one would figure that there should be some sort of relationship that investors, that the investment community would want in relation to that spread. And this chart goes back 10 years. And 10 years ago, the spread between highly rated investment grade bonds and lowly rated investment grade bonds was 350 basis points. Okay, so I don't remember where corporate debt was then, but let's just assume for a second that it was around 5%. Okay, that would imply that, you know, for you to go to market, you'd have to pay 8.5% on BBB rated bonds. If you go a little bit further, you know, stuff here, this is all, you know, this is what they call junk bonds, okay? You've probably heard that terminology, right? So the nice way of saying it is to say speculative, but the other way to say it is to say it's junk bonds. You know, you would expect these spreads to go even greater than that. Now, in 2009, the spread was 350 basis points, and that's been compressing to the point where today it's 73 basis points. Okay, so what that means is that the market is pricing very little return for the risk associated. If you looked at what we did in the video and what we did in class last week, what was the development? You could develop to what kind of yield in industrial in South Florida today?
4.5.
No, that's what you could sell for. You could develop to about 5.5. And you could sell at 4.5, but so there's only about 100 basis point spread between assuming risk and less risk, right? I mean, if you pay 4.5 cap for a stabilized building, there's no development risk. If you're building something from the ground up and you've got entitlement risk and construction risk and leasing risk, you're only getting 100 basis points more. So that's a very tight and compressed, you know, relationship. I told you, historically, you're likely to see 250 basis point spread between the risk you have to assume for developing and the risk you assume for just buying cash flow. Okay? Well, that's happening in other instruments as well. And so I mean, I read these all as, you know, end of cycle. I read these all as signs of, you know, speculation, right? People chase yield. People are always chasing yield. People want more yield. And so, you know, when, you know, one of the things that I showed you, I don't know, those of you saw the chart, saw that I talked about duration and convexity, and I did a chart that, you know, you would see the relationship between bond prices and yields. So you understand that if there's more appetite, there's more demand, people are going to bid up price, price gets bid up, what happens to yield? It comes down. Okay, so more highly speculative activities are appearing or providing similar returns to presumably very highly rated stuff. So just something to bring on. Talking about accounting, I'm not going to spend time. This Grant's newsletter also puts, I think you can subscribe to it freely. They have something called Almost Daily's Grant. And it's just a daily blurb, and it's got like really heavy duty stuff. I usually don't bring stuff, but I thought what was interesting was, you guys ever heard of Under Armour? You guys all, y'all
I like
know
the
Under
brand.
So that's been like a high-flying company for a long time now. I don't know if you noticed the other day, the CEO, the founder, Kevin Plank, stepped down. You guys read that? That's always, so it's kind of like,
Red flag.
yeah, I mean, whenever an executive of a company leaves, there's, you know, people always speculate, right? So what happened with Nike a few weeks ago?
They had advertisement risk. They had a bad.
Well, so they had an issue where the CEO is now stepped down. So he's announced he's stepping down in January, but it all flows from an issue they've had with the whole running club with Alberto Salazar and drug use, you know, performance enhancing drugs and abuse of female athletes and, you know, blah, 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 blah. But none of that stuff came out, but the guy steps down and all this stuff comes out, right? Mm-hmm. The guy at McDonald's stepped down the other day, you know, sort of out of the blue. And then if you read the paper today, it's not the first time at McDonald's that he's had a consensual relationship with someone. He'd actually, you know, so, you know, whatever. And so, so this guy, Kevin Plank, steps down. And there's no, he just decides he's just going to focus on being chairman. But 2 weeks later, the SEC or the company announces that the SEC is investigating the accounting practices of Under Armour. And in particular, it says that, well, the kind of curious thing this guy writes is, so you typically get like these Wells notices from the SEC. That they're investigating something, and typically a company has an obligation to disclose that. And executives are then, under the Wells Act, need to sort of step aside. So they're big warning signs. The company never disclosed anything. And it says that in the meantime, all these executives have sold, I don't know how many millions of dollars of stock along the way. But so what it says is kind of interesting. It says that in one particular quarter, it appears what the SEC is investigating is that Under Armour had a huge profit in a particular quarter where they felt a lot of pressure. And it looked like at the same time Dick's Sporting Goods, which is one of the clients, the quarter after had to return a lot of merchandise. So it looks like it was, you know, in the trade they call channel stuffing. So like Under Armour just shipped a bunch of stuff to these guys
Made pretend they
that
sold
they didn't really want, or like boom. Here, buy it from me, and I record the sale, and then the next month you push it back to me, and I gotta do an allowance, okay? And it seems like they've been doing that channel stuffing thing. So anyway, just stuff. I sometimes bring this from. I get this newsletter every week from a mortgage broker, and I just like to look at it because it gives me what's going on in the marketplace. So this is from this week's summary, and they just talk about deals they do, okay? And then they'll put a thing in the back saying, we got hot money that's looking for X. So if you got X, you know, call us, kind of thing, right? So this should sound familiar if you looked at the videos. Here's a cash out refinancing of a retail center, rate's 4.25%, it's fixed for 10 years, the term is, 10 years, the amortization is 30 years, there's an interest-only period of 12 months, and then there's actually a discounted, a debt service covenant ratio of 1.3. We didn't talk about that this week, but we've talked about that in the past. So you can see it's a real-life loan, and it's very similar to the kind of things that we're talking about in the examples that we're doing. Those of you who are interested in knowing more about the real estate industry and growing as professionals, there's an event that's happening in LA next week, which is REE World. So it used to be the department chair we had before Fred. Fred used to do trips with the groups, which was good. I never went on them, but there used to be a cruise once a year, and it all sort of started with sustainable development. So we had a guy teaching in the program that actually lived in the Caymans. So it was like one of these 1-week cruises, and so you go to the Caymans and you'd see how they develop there, in an island where everything's got to be imported, and how do you deal with, water and sewer and stuff like that, right, and waste, and then they would go to Cozumel, similar sort of barrier island, They'd stop in Key West on the way, and they had issues with desalinization plants, and so would meet with local, regulatory officials and with local developers to talk about this. It was really interesting. But one of the years, so Fred kind of followed up on that, and then he started going to Cuba, and then I guess that stopped happening. But the guy before Fred took the group out to LA once during the week of REE World, and so REE World is it's the annual convention of the REIT industry. And what I like about this, so you don't have to go to LA, but on their website they'll start posting interviews with different officers from different companies. So if you want to know what's going on in retail, look for the interviews with the people that are the executives at Simon or MSRED or Kilroy or Kite or whatever. You want to know what's happening in office, listen to the interviews they'll have with the executives at Boston Properties. If you want to know what's going on in industrial, look at the interviews. It's, just, pop it on in the background while you're driving. It might just be interesting for you also. Anyway, I wanted to follow up. I did a little bit of work this week because I wanted to get myself a little bit up to date as well. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that one of the things that we need to do when we undertake diligence, and I sent you my slides in advance, one of the things that you need to do is understand the markets. Now, in this program, and I think Chapter 8, which had sort of macro, metropolitan market trends, there is there's a market knowledge that transcends what I call the supply and the demand paradigm, okay? So there is, in fact, a way to understand markets in a more macroeconomic perspective. So what you do with GIS, right? Drop a pin, and you say within, X radius, I've got so many people, here's their income profile, here's the traffic on the roads, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to say that that's soft. That's all very important. I don't live in that world. I'm an accountant and a finance professional. So I don't live in those nebulous worlds. I don't see the world like that. I see it as what's the market rent and what's the vacancy. What's the absorption and how much product is coming online. Because those 4 items talk to me about what the market is doing. So if I'm going to develop or I'm going to buy, I need to understand the price, and I need to understand the supply and demand paradigm in the marketplace in which I'm buying or I'm developing to, okay? In fact, I'm going to repeat it again. And if you're selling, you need to understand that, right? So if I'm positioning my asset to sell, what's part of my sales story? What am I going to tell the guy as the leases expire? Are you going to be able to make more money or less? Is there an opportunity to mark things to market or not? Okay? And so we need to understand, we need to have a sense of where our markets are. I'm going to show you, when we get to diligence, how I would specifically triangulate to a particular property. Okay? I just want to talk a little bit more macro now. I want to talk a little bit more macro about different asset classes. So we've got a realm, or we've got an understanding of what different asset classes look or act like. That's on the rental side. We also need to understand the sales side. So how many transactions are there? How many other assets are there for sale? What prices have people been paying per square foot, or per door, or per key, or however it is that people measure it, right? So there's two sort of realities. I'm buying cash stream, and that talks to the rental market, but I'm also paying a specific price that, if we want to put it in residential terms, when we buy a house, we ultimately always go back and say, okay, well, what did the neighbor pay for his house? How much did he pay per square foot, right? Oh, I can buy that house for $600, I can buy that one for $575. Oh, what does that translate to per square foot? So we also need to understand, the income stream, and we need to understand the marketplace. And let me just jump ahead, because I'll show you later, but you know, in San Miguel's realm, in San Miguel's world, there are really two key determinants when you purchase, when you acquire an asset, okay? When you need to understand the project return, and that talks to cash flow, which comes in this business from rents. So we need to understand what drives rents, because rents drive income, and income drives our project return. And then we also need to understand the relative valuation of that asset in the marketplace. Yes, Cole?
You said for commercial is absorption, rents.
So I'm going to jump a little bit more. There are four things that I think are important in the supply, demand paradigm. So I look at rents, and I look at the direction of the rents. I'll show you that, okay? I look for vacancy or occupancy, whichever way you want to look at it, and the direction of that. I look at absorption, okay? Okay, and that's, I can give you the technical definition, but that's how much new product that's come into the market has been consumed, okay? All right, so that's basically opening inventory of supply plus new product in, less any product that's been taken offline, okay? Less ending inventory, okay? So it's basically how much growth there has been. That talks strictly to demand. And then the last thing I like to look at is how much additional product is coming online, right? Because these four items are going to tell me, or should give me, a good backdrop on where rents are going to, or how rents are going to behave in the near or midterm. I can't figure out how rents are going to act in 10 years, okay? But I should have a good sense of where rents are going to be, barring any catastrophic events. I should be able in the real estate industry to take a look at and say, where are rents going to be in the next 2 to 3 years? I should have a good sense for that, okay? How? Well, if you look at trends in where rents are going, I'll show you a graph that I use. If you see how rents are moving, if you see how vacancy is moving, if you see how much product is being absorbed, and if you see how much additional supply is coming online. So there's not an algorithm that's going to tell you exactly, but there's going to be a gut feel. I mean, I had nothing to do with this. There was a banker named Luis Botifoll. He's been dead probably 20 years or something. So Luis Botifoll was an old banker in Cuba. When he came here to Miami, he with a bunch of other guys, well, he eventually wound up running a bank called Republic National Bank. Republic was acquired years ago by Union Planners, which is now Regions. Regions still around, or somebody by Regions?
Yeah, Region is still around.
Okay, all right. So Botifoll, they asked Botifoll once, he was like 90, he was still running the bank, and they asked him, like, why was your bank so successful? You know, it was like, I mean, and we used to bank with these guys, right? So, and the guy said, I know my customers. So what do you mean you know the customers? People come in, they talk to me, I know them, I know their family, I got a gut feeling, I know they're going to pay me back or not. That's lost in the world today. We want the algorithm, right? We want the artificial intelligence going to tell me if the guy's going to pay me back. The reality is we've lost a lot of that human touch, okay? And so going back to, I'm not going to get an algorithm that's going to tell me specifically what that is, right? But I'm gonna get a sense based on all those inputs, right? I mean, if you look at, you know, all these, somebody spilled something the other day about, that China might drop some tariffs or something. All of a sudden the stock market went way up because there's all these algorithms out there that pick up on anything that says reduction of tariffs, boom, and program trades kick off, you know? So we're losing a little bit of the human touch. Oh wait, the other thing which really ultimately flows off, right? You know, your multiple, which ultimately talks to, it's a simple payback, but talks to cash flow from a project, is also a measure. But these two are the kings, okay? These two are the kings. What's my project return, and what am I paying for the asset in the marketplace, okay? So, you know, we need to know those things. So, I took a look, I took a stab, I said, what information can I get? What information can I get about different asset classes? So I can come to the class and say, if any of you anytime are talking about a particular asset class, you can tell me where the market is, where vacancy is, where rents are, where operating expenses are or should be, where cap rates are, right? So that we know. So we've been doing a lot of multifamily, right? So let's talk about multifamily. What are occupancy factors or vacancy factors for multifamily typically?
Large, 6%.
So I want to get national averages because I could focus on this market, but I said, let me give you broad information. So certain things that are going to be, so when we talk about multifamily, what's vacancy? Somebody talks to you about an apartment building that's 85% occupied. In Davie, is that low or is that high?
Low.
Okay, so if it's low, what does that tell me?
That they're so oversaturated.
Well, there might be a problem, but there might be an opportunity, right? So there might be a problem, but there might be an opportunity. Vacancy factors in particular in this country, okay, today. No.
Isn't vacancy like nationwide a little bit higher than, or a little bit lower than 85? It's like 80.
So vacancy factors in multifamily, I can't read my whole handwriting here, but it'll come. So basically, it's right at 5% nationally. If you break it down, so this is, you get all this stuff, this is from Newmark. All the big brokerage houses publish research. If you have access to CoStar, you get CoStar too. None of these give you the whole truth, but they give you partial truths that are pretty darn close, okay, to one another. These people spend a lot of money gathering information for their investment salespeople, okay, and for their leasing brokers. So multifamily, let's go ahead and make a little grid here so that we can, you know, we can kind of, so when we look at multifamily, we're looking at, I didn't talk about rents yet, we'll talk about rents in a second. When we talk about vacancy or occupancy, we talk about vacancy, we're talking about 5%. Now that, you know, what these guys are saying, you roughly have major markets are slightly less than that, like 4.5%. Minor markets are a little bit more than that, they're about 5.5%. But you can see almost nationally, multifamily assets have very high occupancy factors. Do we know, by the way, Yardi tells me the same thing, you know, 95%. Do we know where average rents are? Do we know what average rents are in this country for multifamily? Do we have an idea?
$3.
1,100.
Okay, so you said $3, you said 1,100. For what? For what?
I mean, square
So I mean, let me-
foot and
Per square foot per
per
month?
square foot and per month?
Like per month, per square foot?
Per month.
Okay.
I think
Do you know what Yardi is? Does anybody know what Yardi is?
Management software, right?
So it is a software for the development industry. It has nice modules for property management in particular. So they got a lot of data that they can play with, right? So Yardi reports the average rents in this country in multifamily are $1,475 a month. Now,
Yeah.
well, so you know, listen, you could figure out. I don't know what the average size of an apartment is, but let's just make it simple and say it's a little under 1,000.
900.
let's just say it's $1.50 a month per square foot, okay? Okay? Now, where are they in South Florida? Depends where in South Florida. Go to downtown Fort Lauderdale, go to South Beach.
Expensive.
10% higher.
It's
A
more
lot
expensive
more
than
than that,
downtown
probably between $2 to $3 a square foot a month,
Yeah.
okay?
And
So,
Seattle,
Well, that's what I was
LA,
thinking, like New
San
York is
Francisco,
probably
oh my God.
$5-6.
well, yeah, New York, maybe not 5 or 6, but 4 or something like that, right? So, I mean, there's totally, you know, there's totally different now. Do we know what, so this is important to know, but do we know what rent growth is expected to be or what it historically has been?
Oh, my parents get this job.
That's a critical one.
Isn't it like,
2 bedroom, that's 750.
Hold on, I got somebody answering.
it's around 5%?
It's a bit high.
That sounds high to me. That sounds very, what's inflation in this country?
3.
It's not even 3, I mean, people are trying to get it to 2, you know? And we have very low growth right now. So, funny that you would ask, okay? So rent growth pretty much for like the last 30 years in this country has been right at 2.5% every year.
Oh, so it's just inflation.
It's basically inflation.
Yes,
So,
Yes.
so multifamily doesn't have long-term leases.
that's why, the governor of California is putting a cap in the rent.
Well, so it's not the governor, there's been, the legislature has enacted some rent control legislation.
They need.
So, I mean, it's kind of going back to the 20s and 30s here. We still have rent control districts in
They
certain
did
parts of
that
the
in New
country.
York, it worked.
You think it worked?
My grandparents are still taking benefit out of that from they
So-
moved
so-
into the
so-
60s and they still live in a 3-bedroom in New York with bathroom. They still
And-
pay
and what is-
a little bit of 500.
And what does that talk to the owner, though?
Well,
Well, what?
I guess slowly but surely the market, those people will go out and then they will those houses
I-
will be
I wanna
vacant
be
and then they
human.
will.
I want to be human, but all of a sudden we take a slice of capitalism, right? Where we
Well-
say,
Isn't that gentrification?
It's you have to balance it a little bit. It's not balanced at all.
I want to stay away from political discussions other than to say that in this country, the laws typically protect free enterprise.
Yeah.
And the minute you put a rent control process in place, you're penalizing one of the two parties in it. But I do recognize that affordability in housing is a problem in this country.
Okay. If they don't do that, it will be a bigger problem.
Okay. I just want to move on, because that's a we can't win there, okay? Now,
We can't touch that.
no, it's not, there's no solution for it, so, so what else might we want to know? Now, to your point, Judson, I don't know how they get this, but apparently operators have actually been able to get close to a 5% increase in NOI over the last 30 years in multifamily. Now, how do they do that?
Could that also be?
They're squeezing expenses.
Yes.
They're squeezing expenses, okay?
A lot.
So that's kind of where it works, okay? Now, do we know what operating expenses are in multifamily?
No, before water, my parents don't before water.
Yes, Judson.
Just quickly to touch on the increase in rents. Would the increase in rents, like on specific, like would this factor in, like, if you were to update the property value at things like that?
Well, I'm giving you national averages across huge portfolios, okay? So obviously there are arbitrage opportunities. So, you know, a very logical play in a value plus strategy is to take a dated apartment complex, fix the landscaping, fix all the common infrastructure, you know, spruce it up, fix kitchens, you know, fix one unit at a time, update kitchens, update bathrooms, and jack rents up a lot more than 2.5%.
Yeah,
But there's a capital investment in it. So the answer is no. You know, not every rent is going to automatically go up 2.5%.
yeah, but no, I guess I'm just saying that 2.5% is national average, but that's including, that's just everything. So if one building were to have value add and increase by, let's just say 10%, then that number is all associated with the average of 2.5%.
Yeah, I mean, these are averages that Yardi is giving me, Yardi Matrix is giving me, and it's across, huge, gamut of, of property. And it's also going to take into account that there's certain markets that have a dearth of new supply coming in, and some that have an oversupply where rents don't go up, okay? Or people are making concessions all the time, okay? Operating expenses, curiously, depending on whether they are garden style, so we've got garden style and we've got mid-rise. Do we know what the breakup of those are, roughly? Do we know how much is what?
Talking about floors? Talking about floors?
The style. Do we know how much
What the
of
difference?
multifamily is garden style versus mid-rise? No,
Like, I mean, I definitely think
Well, gardens are
are less.
more expensive to maintain, right?
I'm not. That's not the question I'm asking. I mean, I could ask like, do they have good ice cream at Dairy Queen? I don't know.
You're talking about in the
I'm
market
asking what percentage.
is distribution. What's
Yeah.
the
So,
marketplace?
what do you think? Do you think most assets are? Do you think that most assets are garden style, or do you think most assets are mid-rise?
Garden style.
Yeah. So most assets in this country are multifamily are garden style.
70.
Most people rent. Now that's all changing. Most people rent in the suburbs. The suburbs tend to be 1, 2-story, maybe 3. And if you want validation of that, I don't want to jump to sales yet, okay? I'll jump to sales, okay? When we talk about sales, okay, we can talk about cap rates, or we can talk about price per square foot. But in multifamily, we tend to talk about
Per unit?
price per door, okay? So we tend to talk about price per door, okay? And so nationally, the average is $182,000 a door. So, but it's $315 for mid-rise and $151 for garden, okay? So you can see that the average tends to be towards the lower end. So the lower end is definitely going to be a bigger composition of and in Florida, that's kind of what you're going to see, okay? Yes, Sam?
Oh, no,
Okay.
it's stretching. So for garden, you have 150, is that what you have there?
Yeah, 151.
I mean, that's not high, you don't think, for South Florida?
Per year?
For South Florida, probably not high. I mean, the deals I'm in, we've bought multifamily all over small markets in the southeast, and we're paying 80 to 100,000 a door. But
Yeah, exactly.
no, South Florida would be much higher than that. But these are national averages. So I want to show you how to whittle this down later on. I want to start at a 20,000 foot level, and then when you're actually looking at the NOLA townhouses over here, you need to understand South Florida, Broward, Central Broward,
Yeah.
Davie.
I saw it.
And then you need to understand the competitive properties to that one. Yes, Cole?
I have a question about the inflation, and has inflation been around 2.5 to 3% over like how many years?
You can take a look at very long-term averages in this country, and I'm talking long-term 50, 70-year type, 100-year numbers, and inflation runs at about 2.5% a year with very little volatility.
So for the last 10 years, you would say it's stayed?
Well, I don't know that I would tell you the last 10 years. The last 10 years have probably been lower than 2.5%. I don't know the answer empirically for that, but you can find that. There's a place called Fred. Fred.
How are assets?
Well, hold on, let me finish because it's important, and I'll answer that. There's a place called Fred. More than giving you the fish, I'm going to give you the fishing rod. Fred is a site that's managed by the St. Louis Federal Reserve. Okay? Any information that you want, that particular Fed, the St. Louis Fed, tends to be the one that gathers or accumulates information. So if you want to know inflation data, if you want to know interest rate data, if you want to know employment data, if you want to know debt outstanding, go to the Fred site and you'll get the answer for that. You can download a spreadsheet. You pay for that as being a taxpayer. Okay, now what's your question?
That was half my question, because how are cap rates compressed if inflation's so low? Is that because it would tie in, the interest rates being low ties into that, no?
Well, so what did we say inflation was? I mean, what did we say cap rates were the other day?
Discount minus growth.
Discount minus growth, right? So there's different, bits moving there. To the extent that growth is low, right, that might push the discount rate component to be a larger number, right? Okay? Depending on how much leverage you have, that's really going to determine. So if you're levered 70–80% and the cost of debt is like really, really low, right, you're going to wind up with pretty low cap rates, right? If you can borrow money at 3%, right, you don't need an 8 cap in order to meet your weighted average cost of capital.
It's just like, I don't get how the inflation is so low.
Yeah.
I don't get how like they're putting more money into the economy, money's cheaper, and inflation is 2%. And then all asset prices are high.
Okay, I mean, that's probably more for an economics class, but I don't know that anybody's got the answer for that, okay? I think it was Mario Draghi who's the head of, he's just stepping down now, or just stepped down as the head of the ECB, the European Central Bank, and he said something the other day along the lines of, look, because in Europe they've actually got less than, close to 1% growth across, and he's kind of saying, I don't know what else we can do to get this higher. And I think if you listen to Powell's comments this week, I think, from what I can recall reading, there was some concern about being able to get growth higher. So, I mean, they've been trying to push up consumption, right? Push up consumption, but it's still not there. The people aren't, the consumption isn't, I get commensurate with the growth in money supply. But you look at factors, again, this is more for an economics class. There's more cash sitting on the sidelines, investable cash in stock markets, hedge funds, than there's been ever. But assets are super valued. So, yeah, there's been a lot of money creation or money supply creation, but that hasn't necessarily transcended into industrial output. And yeah, unemployment is low, but participation is historically low. So if participation was what it was 10 years ago, unemployment would be so low. So we haven't really created that much employment either in the context of participation.
What is participation?
Participation is what percentage of the population works.
Oh, okay.
So someone like me, I've been unemployed for 10 or 12 years.
Unemployed?
Yeah, I'm unemployed. I'm not part of the workforce.
But you don't pay.
Well, I mean, I get a W-2 for whatever peanuts here, but I'm not fully employed. I'm
that's still
I'm underemployed. I don't work for, I'm an investor. I don't work. Somebody asked me this week, what do you do?
This is not your job.
They teach.
You can tell him you teach. That's
Well,
not your
I
work.
but it's not like a full-time, I mean, it's like a full-time hours, but it's not a full-time pay. But I'm not complaining, I do this because I love it.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining, I love this. I figured out this morning how much I get paid per hour. But I don't do it for the money, I do it for the love. I do it for the love. Okay, so, listen. There's roughly $200 billion of transactions, of investment sale transactions. It's a very vibrant market. A lot of transactions, that's good. What that tells you is these numbers have depth to them, okay? Do we know what cap rates are there? I might as well just jump to the cap rates for a second and come back to expenses.
Five and change, right?
No, I would say it's a lot less than that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I had it here. Hold on. Okay, it's right on 5. It's right on 5 as well. Okay? It's right on 5. And it goes very similar to occupancy, has nothing to do with it, just coincidental, okay? Anywhere from 4.5 in major metros to 5.5. Now, let's jump back to operating expenses. What are operating expenses in multifamily? What did we use when we did the little model that we did?
40%.
40%. Do you think I just made that up?
No.
I mean, I kind of made it up, but I really didn't, okay? So depending on whether it's garden style or mid-rise, you're gonna be anywhere from 35 to 40%, okay? And curiously, if you want to go and figure this out, now this one I did just sort of distribute the other day haphazardly, okay? But 35 to 40% of your effective gross income, okay, should be what your operating expenses are, okay? Vacancy, nationally, vacancy loss is like 5.5%. Credit loss is about 0.5. Okay, so combined, it's about 6%. Okay? And then taxes are anywhere from 13 to 15. Okay? Salaries are going to be 10. Okay? Listen, you guys can look this up. You can write notes or whatever, and so on. I think these are the two biggest ones, okay? So you can just see the bulk of it is going to be property taxes, and so insurance and utilities and all that are not that significant, okay? There is an other income component. Curiously, other income accounts for about 5%. So, Judson, to your point, when you come in, one of the things that people like to do. A friend of mine's buying a multifamily asset in like some little town outside of Louisville. And the first thing he said to me was, oh, you gotta get in this deal. Well, they're not even charging pet fees. So apparently in a lease, they're allowed to charge $25 a month for every pet you have. And they're not doing it. So pet fees, telecommunication, cable, laundry, parking. There's all kinds of, extra fees that people do, but across the board, 5% of rental income is other. Okay, so, just an opportunity for making. So, when we look at this, I mean, we got a lot of information here, don't we? Do we feel like we're starting to understand multifamily a little bit better? Yeah? No? Maybe? Should we do industrial because we've done industrial?
Yes.
Probably a better investment.
Well, I don't know if it's a better investment or a worse investment. I mean, it depends what you want, right? Or who you are. Where do we think, based on what we talked about last week, where do we think rents are in industrial in this country?
Lower than.
$9 a square foot, well, maybe in Miami.
It's like $8, right?
But, I mean, are we talking, like.
What did Prologis have when we went over the Prologis supplemental the other day? Huh? You don't remember? I remember. It's like 5.75 or something like that. So, Cushman and Wakefield tells us that, Jonathan, NNN is triple net. It's not XXX, it's NNN, okay?
Right.
NNN, 580 a square foot. Do we know what operating expenses are in industrial? Isabel, do we know what it is? Oh, you were looking it up?
Yes.
Oh, you were. Okay, well, what does it tell you?
Not yet. I was.
Oh, was it? Oh, you're sending a text to somebody to ask them what if they knew.
Yeah.
Do we know what industrial we talked about this one the other day. What are
50%?
we talk about per square foot when we talk about industrial. When we talk about the other asset classes. Except hospitality, we talk about per square foot.
You did say $3 a square foot?
I might have said in South Florida it was closer to that.
Okay.
Nationally?
150? 2?
Yeah, I mean, we did the same thing with Prologis the other day. We don't remember these things. We should remember these things. These are all inputs. So you could use $2 as a sort of rule of thumb, okay? Okay, per square foot. Do you know what vacancy is nationally? Do you know how big the industrial market is nationally? Do you have any idea? We said it was 200 million square feet in Dade County. It's about 130 million square feet in Broward. Do you know how big it is nationally? 12 billion square feet. 12 billion square feet. It's pretty big. Okay? So, do we know what vacancy is nationally? We've talked about this as well. What did we talk about?
10%?
It's a lot less than that.
5%?
Yeah, so I'd probably use 5. This is Cushman. No, this is Jones Lang LaSalle. I thought it was Cushman. They're at 7%. I think in major metros like, LA, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, South Florida, and less than 5, okay? Do we know what cap rates are? Do we know what rent growth should be? Do we know what rent growth is? So I don't have any empirical support for this. I have some anecdotal data. I think we said it the other day. I think I was saying that Hamid, the CEO of Prologis, was saying that the leasing spread on his leases were what?
3%?
I said 30% the other day.
Oh.
I said it was huge, that, you know, there's such a demand for industrial product in this country. Do we know what absorption was last year of industrial product? So if you want to get a sense, Alec, you're asking a question, how do you know where the market's going to be? Absorption last year was 90 million square feet. So if you've got 11 billion square feet and you're absorbing 90, that's 1%. You're putting very little product in. So you're not upsetting the supply-demand paradigm that much. Nationally, you may be locally in a particular market. Now, you want to sign a concern. Absorption last year was was 90 million square feet. Deliveries were 120 million. Now I've got an excess of 30 million square feet that's coming to the market that's going to go to vacancy. But what's more concerning than that? How much is coming online? Now, what asset? Does anybody want to build retail now?
No.
What do people want to build?
Last mile.
Are developers the smartest people in the world?
No.
They're always behind the curve. There's 250 million square feet coming, you know, online. So now I got almost 3 times last year's demand coming online. So now you start going, this thing's hot. Rents have been going up, but I mean, I'd like to see a trend line on this and see if this is going up. My sense is that this has actually gone up because so much supply has come online. Okay? And what you're definitely seeing is, I don't have a number, I don't have an empirical number, I have an anecdotal sense that the rent growth has been very high, but I don't know what the future holds, okay? Do we know what cap rates are here?
5.5.
5%. That's obviously going to depend on, you know, manufacturing space is going to be higher than distribution space. Smaller markets is going to be higher than lower markets. Class C product might be 7.5 cap. In fact, that's what this says. So, you know, Class A 5, Class B 6, Class C 7, 7.5. What are las prestaciones? How do you say that in English? What are the attributes of Class C industrial product? Less volume, maybe a grade, right? Maybe not as many doors, maybe location or access to major thoroughfares, column spacing tighter, making it more difficult to navigate, you know, etc. Older structures, you know, etc. Okay, so do we know? So I ran out of time. Do we know how much that translates to per square foot? We came up with a number in the, what was the number in the example that I did in the video? $8 per square foot, bro.
$8.
Dollars per square foot to build or to sell.
80 bucks? No.
So we were building at 160, right?
Without land.
All in.
With land. So we said cost was 100. We said land was 59.
Yeah.
So, you know, we were in all in at about 150. Stuff is selling, you know, at a 4.5 cap. It's going to be closer to 180 or whatever. Now, we can be a little bit more intelligent than that, right? I mean, at a certain point, right? We can cap that at 0.5, can't we? Can we do that? Does that tell us how much per square foot? It's like 120, something like that?
Instead of the 0.8,
What 0.8?
you said we can cap it at 0.5.
Yeah, why would we use 0.8?
Because we got 5.8, that's what I'm referencing. So
That's the rent, the triple net rent. So if I want to get the sales value per square foot, I just divide the net rent by my cap rate.
116.
116. Okay, so I'm just gonna say across the country, $120 square foot, but we know in South Florida, it's closer to $200, which means in Tupelo, Mississippi, it's probably gonna be closer to 100. Do you guys find this, I mean, is this of interest?
Yes.
I mean, I think, I mean, it's not in the textbook anywhere. Maybe you should stay on the textbook, I don't know.
After you
Retail.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if you wrote bigger at times. Just
I
like the things
understand that,
by
but
objects.
I can repeat whatever number you want me to repeat if you can't, because the problem is this stupid thing, right? Because otherwise I'd use the whole board, but I wanted to put it in, but I'm serious, whatever number, tell me and I'll,
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like going forward, like as you write.
okay, I'll try
Yeah,
to do that, that's a
yeah.
fair comment. Retail, do we know how big the retail market is in this country? So I got an interesting slide. So this is not, again, this is not statistically valid, but it's representative. I used to do an analysis. I used to follow transactions in the state of Florida. Now, the state of Florida is not like the rest of the country, okay? But over a 15-year period of institutional real estate transactions in the state of Florida, there were a couple of things that I thought were relevant, okay? 40% of the sales were multifamily assets. That's kind of interesting because when I looked, some of these things I got volume information on, so they're, I didn't get it for industrial, but I think nationally it's not far off. So multifamily was 40%, okay? Office was 25%. Okay, now I didn't do hospitality, okay? Retail was 30%, okay? And then industrial was 14%. So, I'm not telling you that distribution is valid across the country, but that's kind of what Florida is. A lot of people live here, some people work, and a lot of people buy, okay? That's kind of, but there's a lot of retirees here, right? There's a lot of people, there's an older population, maybe not here in South Florida, but does anybody work on, like, from Tampa south? I mean, people that work in retail maybe, you know, but there's a lot of old people that just retire there and stuff. So that's kind of, and then from a market perspective, Miami-Dade County was about 26%. Miami-Dade, Broward was about 20, okay? And it's similar to Orlando and Tampa, okay? They were like at 19 and 20, Tampa and Orlando. And Jacksonville was nothing,
What's the fourth one?
9%. Orlando,
No, I'm sorry, to the right of the 14%. That word.
industrial.
Gotcha, thank you.
Orlando is like 20%, and then Jacksonville is only like 10. Okay, so these are the markets in Florida. Okay, and Jacksonville is a metro, but it's really not. Okay, it's really not.
Yeah.
Oh, and I left. This doesn't add up, does it? 20. Yeah, because Palm Beach is like 15.
Vacancies,
Maybe it adds now. 45, 65, 85. Okay, I got too much in there, but look, you're evenly split. You're evenly split. Except for Jacksonville, it's like really small. Okay, so that's kind of a thought. Okay, retail. Do we know how big the retail market is? Similar to industrial. Okay, it's kind of interesting nationally. It's very similar to industrial. It's about 11 million square feet. Okay. Curiously, well, the Jones Lang LaSalle in their market reports does a clock, like kind of like rising, peaking, off peak. You know, it just kind of. And in industrial, all the markets are sort of peaking, and in retail, they're all like really way past peak. You know, the way they define it. Okay. So, do we know how occupied retail is in this country?
Is that purely retail, or retail could be part of a mixed use or something like that?
So nobody, if there's a mixed-use asset, people are gonna, use, if you look at Brickell City Center and there's an office component and a hospitality component and a retail component, those statistics are gonna be kept independent of one another.
Okay.
So there's no sort of mixed-use
So you're
statistic out
counting
there.
that into that 11 million?
Yeah, of course, any retail that's inside a mixed-use project is gonna go in there.
Not just El Mall?
Not what? Not just the mall, not just the mall. In fact, malls are a very small percentage. Malls are roughly less than 10% of all retail in this country. So most retail are gonna be the grocery anchored, the community centers, the power centers, the strip centers, okay? So malls are only about 10% of the,
Where does restaurants like fall in that? Is that retail?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So restaurants are part of the percentage.
retail. Okay, so do we know what occupancy is or vacancy in retail? Because we figure that's the market that's way down, right? It's the one nobody wants to buy, right?
No, everybody buys online now.
So why are they building this massive mall?
I still.
You ever heard what P.T. Barnum said? Said there's a sucker born every minute? No, so listen, it's the greater fool theory, Everybody thinks you're more intelligent than the next guy. The thing with real estate and the thing with all these statistics is that these statistics tell you the same thing I just told Judson. It can tell you there's a problem, or it can tell you what the opportunity is. So the people that want to build this big mall there off I-75 are saying, hey, there's an opportunity here for us to exploit something that this market doesn't have. Irrespective of what may be happening elsewhere. Time may prove that they're the greater fool. Okay, or they're the sucker that was born every minute. But I'm going to tell you, vacancy in the retail space right now across the country is only 5%. Yeah, and if you take a look at, if you take a look at this, now the interesting thing is similar to Name REE, there's a group called ICSC, the International Council of Shopping Centers, and they provide some industry analysis or insight as well. So do we know what average rents are? Now, this is all over the place because we know that anchors and big malls pay very little compared to inline guys. The grocery anchors in a community center pay a lot less than the inline guys. But there is an average. Do we know what average retail rents are in this country?
No, more than that. It was like 60 for the inland.
So full service, they're 19 bucks. Do we know what operating expenses are? So in a mall, they're huge.
Yeah, per square foot.
Security, everything I said that
Cleaning,
per square
janitorial.
foot. Sorry?
So like janitorial, not just security, cleaning, like.
So when we talk about operating expenses, we're talking about all the operating expenses of an asset. We talk about there's revenues and there's expenses to get us to NOI. So when we say expenses, it's everything. So if we quote rents gross and we're not going into, vacancy loss and credit loss and all that, with expenses we talk about everything. So I'm trying to get to an NOI number.
45.
You think 5?
No, I said 45% of it.
Yeah, but we don't talk in percentages. We talk in per square foot. And I can tell you, a mall is probably going to be $30 or $40 with security, with air conditioning, with heating, okay? With all the promotions that they do, okay? But a strip center doesn't have anything. On average, these people are saying it's about $9 national. That doesn't seem odd to me compared, because I would equate this similar to office, okay? Okay, again, on a blended basis. What does that give us as NOI rents? $10, right? So, do we know what cap rates are? So that's where it's kind of wheels have kind of
Probably
come
higher?
off the ground. Yeah, so cap rates.
Because of the risk of retail?
Cap rates. Well, because I don't know if it's the risk or not, but it's people aren't buying. Okay.
Well, I meant the risk of people not liking the trend.
So 7.5. So if we cap if we cap $10 at 7.5, what does that give me? Yeah. So like $135 a square foot. Okay? You probably can't build a retail center for $135 a square foot. The guys I invest with have bought 3 retail centers in the last year, and every one that we've bought have been significantly below replacement cost. Significantly below replacement cost. Because there's no demand, because people aren't paying for it, right? And that's one of their arguments. That's one of the arguments. I don't like it. I think that's a greater fool theory. It's one of the arguments that people use is people say, oh, well, I can buy this cash flow and it's below replacement cost, which means nobody's going to come in and compete against me, because if they come in and compete against me, they're going to have to pay more to build it.
Is that wrong?
I don't know that it's wrong, but I think so theoretically it's right? Theoretically it sounds right. I think pragmatically you can sort of kid yourself a little bit too and assume there's not going to be any competition, because there's a guy out here who wants to build the largest shopping center in the country right here, even though it's going to cost a lot more than this. So that in and of itself is not just a deterrent. It sounds like it is, but people are still developing in this country.
Now, with the numbers that, I'm pretty sure there's other guys out there who's looking into this market. Why would they still build something like that? Just because the pool thing?
I mean, look, I'm going to go back, because they can. I mean, that's because they can, because it's a free country and we can do with our money what we like. Okay? I'm going to get to you. So here's the problem. So how are they going to finance it? They're going to have to convince some equity partner, and they're going to have to convince some bank to give them money. But then you read the Wall Street Journal today. Who read the Wall Street Journal today?
My subscription expired.
My subscription is Monday through Friday.
Nice try. They don't sell weekly subscriptions. So there's a very long article today that talks about how JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, trying to earn the investment banking business from WeWork, loaned it one loaned at $5 billion and another $6 billion. Wells Fargo, they couldn't get past credit committee. And so, I don't know if you know who Eastdil is. Eastdil is like the second largest investment sales brokerage in the country. So there was HFF that was bought by JLL recently. You were going to tell the class who these people were?
Actually, I was just reading stuff that you were just talking about.
Okay, all right. And Eastdil was the second. Eastdil was a subsidiary of Wells Fargo. They've not been spun off to management into a private equity group, but they were a very substantial investment banking business in a real estate realm, and they actually convinced Wells Fargo to loan them money. And the CEO actually made a very compelling argument saying, oh, I know this Alfred E. Newman guy, or whatever his name was. I want to keep an eye on him. I want to mentor him. I want to make sure that he does the right things. And it all blew up. So now all these banks are sort of scrambling around to figure out what happens to their loans. So I don't know. You're asking a damn good question. But they've got to convince equity partners, and they've got to convince creditors, in addition to the municipalities and the neighbors, that this makes sense.
It's only because I know Dayland, Bar Harbor, and Aventura.
But let me ask you this question: do we know what rent growth is in retail? Because this is sort of anomaly in all this stuff, right? What's rent growth in retail across the board?
5%.
You think it's 5%? You think
I think
retailers
it's
are
probably
doing that
higher.
well? I wanted to mention, retail, online sales in this country have grown from 4% of total sales in 2004 to almost 10% today. Okay? So that's definitely pushed that. So has that impacted this?
Yes. Yes.
So should
Amazon.
rents go up 5%?
No.
But like if we're increasing the population and more people have to eat food and more people have to go to the gym and more people have to use all these utilities, wouldn't that, but yeah, I mean if you rent out a gym, that's in retail space.
Yeah.
So curiously, this is what's happening in malls and retail centers. So Who are the biggest closers? Shoe stores. So like all the shoe
Sporting
people?
goods.
No, sporting goods aren't.
They closing down a lot, like Dick's, like Sports
Sports Authority was the one, but not Dick's. Now somebody's saying
Macy's about to close. JCPenney.
Macy's. Okay, so what's closing? Shoes?
JCPenney.
Shoes? No, food's not closing.
No,
So-
food is not closing.
So last year,
Electronics.
I think they've already gone, so, last year,
Babies R
last year,
Us.
2,300 shoe stores, and I think
Yeah,
there were two
Adidas.
big closures, okay?
Sears.
700 apparel,
Toys R Us.
Toys R Us.
that's already from before, 500 discount dollar type stores, 300 mass merchandisers, those would be the Sears, Bon-Tons, and 170 bookstores. Now, look at what's growing, dining facilities. Dining facilities in malls, 1,850 apertures. Service tenants, 1,800. Cosmetics and beauty, apparel and accessories, fitness and wellness, grocery, curiously consumer electronics, home furnishings and mass merchandise. But, the bulk of it is shoes and apparel or clothing and dining, service, cosmetic, anything that's, wellness is going up, okay? Now,
Yeah, the
but with all
makeup
that,
industry being
but
taken
with
a
all,
lot.
but with all that, guys, rents are going up 6% in this country, and if you go to malls, I used to do this every year with the supplemental at Simon. Simon every year has leasing spread of over 10%.
So the online market didn't really affect workflow?
It hasn't affected them yet. Now, somewhere down the line, somewhere down the line, something's got to happen, okay? I guess. But you don't see successful retailers closing stores down because of online. Now, you're seeing changes in the way they work, right? So Whole Foods, in a way, is now fulfilling all the prime grocery things out of their stores, not out of distribution facilities, out of the stores. Staples fulfills their online orders out of their stores. They were the first guys to do that 15 years ago.
Why is that smart? Why take on the overhead?
Well, I'm not saying it's smart. The problem is they've got a structure they can't get rid of, right? So leases are legally binding contracts in this country. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to close the store. You still have a lease obligation. Okay? So,
Then again, you're getting both.
and that's what they're saying is, well, we got the lease, we're going to do this. Now, some of the other strategies that people have used have been, I know Best Buy started reducing the footprint, and I think what you're going to see over time is some of these guys are going to continue to reduce footprint, and they'll figure out what they can fulfill from stores. Because, listen, we all do this. Who goes to the stores, looks around, and then goes online to buy the cheapest alternative? So, this is an old-fashioned equivalent, but I'm driving up here and I see the billboard that says South Florida Auto Show, November 1st through the 10th. So, before the internet and all that, if you wanted to buy a car this year, you would go to the auto show. Because it's like you go to one place where you can touch everything without these salespeople trying to push you into something, right? It's like where you can shop. Now you can do it online, okay? But I went to the boat show last week. I'm not even in the market for a boat, but you go every year, because 2 or 3 years from now, 4 or 5 years from now, when you are ready to, make the change, right? Then you know what's out there, right? It's an opportunity to touch and feel without, and I'm not going to buy at the boat show. I'm going to go and see, you're going to negotiate, and then you're going to play hard to get. Then you wait for the people to call you and say, oh, let's do a sea trial or whatever, okay? So, don't buy a boat. Go on a friend's boat, it's a lot cheaper. Okay, yes?
I bought one at the boat show.
You bought one at the boat show?
Just rent one every time you need it.
No. Look, I went out on my boat yesterday.
You pay like
It was heaven. It was heaven. I just dropped the anchor, saw the sunset. Can't put a price on it.
No.
Yes, Yes, Kenny.
Being that leases are leases, right?
has the vacancy rate been, you know, altered for those people that have walked away from those leases
Yeah.
or gone
Well,
to
so,
bankruptcy?
so what happens, the only way you can really get rid of a lease in this country is bankruptcy, and that's why you see retailers a lot of times going to bankruptcy so they can
Just to get
restructure.
Correct, so vacancy is really artificial right now, because if they're still in bankruptcy court, they're still tied to those leases.
No, 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 no.
And they haven't been accounted for.
No, 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 no. Okay, I mean, they're not paying, if they're in bankruptcy, they're not paying. So, listen, if you take a look, there's two or three large mall operators out there that kind of have a large portfolio of the malls that have the problems with the Sears, Bon-Ton, trying to think. J.C. Penney's isn't bankrupt yet, and it may not be, you know. That have the troubled big boxes that are going dark. And most of these have already been working for some time on programs. Because you know what happens is a lot of the big boxes in malls are not owned by the retailer, by the real estate operator. They're owned by the retailer.
So, yeah.
And
That's
so
the value that's in Sears right now.
well, that's the value that Lampert has seen in Sears, and that they
then-
spun off Seritage, which held the fee in a lot of the Sears. There's a lot of value in Macy's there, presumably. But the value it definitely brings is that a dark box in a shopping center or in a mall doesn't do anybody any good because it's got to attract people. And so for a long time, a lot of these REITs have been actively working or engaging in purchasing some of these dark spaces to incorporate them into a different, you know, theme within. And you've seen the themes, you know,
Oh, that's what
restaurants, you know,
market inside
food
of
centers, wellness centers.
So the
For
figure
us,
has been,
Hold on, multifamily. Who's driven by Dadeland lately? What are they building in Dadeland? A Marriott.
Yeah.
In the parking lot of Dadeland, they're building a huge Marriott.
Isn't there one
Because
right across the street?
Right across the
There's
street.
one-
actually.
Right across
Three-
There's a
three-
courtyard
three-
and an actual big one.
Well, there's 3 blocks south is what's his name? The Argentinian guy. Ricardo Glass MDM. Miami Dadeland Marriott, MDM. He's MDM Development. He's the guy that did the Met downtown as well. But his first big development was the big Dadeland Marriott there. But it's one of those like specialty, you know, like sort of high-end boutique things. So there's this whole transformation from destination for shopping to destination for life. Okay? I'm not saying it's going to be successful, but that's kind of where, you know, it's kind of where it's all going. And what I can say is this, is part of the reason that the rent growth continues to be high is that there's very long leases in retail. And not only are there long leases, there are a lot of extensions because people don't want to set up, fixturize a store or facility and then move. People get accustomed to, have you ever noticed retailers don't move? You know, they never, ever move because people get used to, you know, it's the repetition of going there. And so what happens is some of this stuff is being marked to market now from leases that were signed 30 years ago. People have just been going on, you know, extensions, okay? And so I'll get to you in a second, Cole. So, you know, it's a whole changing environment, but it's not really as bad as you. This somehow doesn't equate with this in my mind. And the guys I've been investing with, that's their logic. Now, maybe we get burned, okay? Cole, you had a question.
That was my exact question. Why are you investing with them if you don't believe in what they're doing? Not No, look, I mean, I get on the phone with these because this lady asked me, what do you do? And I manage my investments. Well, what does that mean? I mean, I got on the phone with this guy this week. I called him twice. So, I mean, look, I'll just tell you what gives me comfort. So the guys that run this asset match, so it's guys I used to work with, but the 2 guys that run this business are ex-JP Morgan acquisition guys. They brought in a third partner who's a retail broker in the Southeast. They've set up a retail brokerage, tenant rep, and a property management business. So they're managing about 25 million square feet of retail all over the Southeast, but they're tenant reps. So when we look at a mall, they're looking at a mall and saying, okay, the 3 we've bought have all been very highly occupied. You know, over 95, okay? With all long-term leases in place and all presumably credit tenants. But for every one of the spaces, there's an alternative plan saying, hey, if these guys blow out or want to restructure, this is who we can replace in there. Now, whether they can deliver or not is a different story, but there's a plan behind all of this. And the gamble is that there's dislocation here, right? Because this seems a lot more interesting to me today than that. Now, industrial was interesting some years ago, but today, this seems more appealing. That's the arbitrage that I see. I'm not an operator. I wouldn't do this on my own. I mean, I wouldn't do it, you know, just like, but, yes,
When
ma'am.
some market have like a problem or something, how long does it take for you to see, like 2-3 years? Like, for example, now with the online market and with the retail, at some point it will catch up with one another.
Of course it does. I mean, it takes time,
So usually
Isabel,
when you're
but-
trying to, I guess what I'm trying to say is, once it's going to a market to evaluate the market, you look at the numbers now to try to predict what they might be in the future. And what time frame do you give yourself in case the market might change?
I mean, I don't know that you're asking me the question I'm going to answer, but I hope it gives you an answer, okay? And that is, in the multifamily space, Newmark identified that the average, you're going to get the answer you're looking for, okay? Maybe. I can't give you, I don't know everything.
No, I just want to have
I
a
don't know
time
everything.
frame also.
So the average hold time for multifamily assets in this country is about 60 months.
Okay.
Now, that's what Newmark identified for multifamily. I had challenged, when you watch my videos,
I do, which I do.
if you had watched all of my videos,
have.
and if you had listened intently,
I mean, you
in
don't-
one of those, I know
Yes,
I spew so much, in one of those videos, I said that I challenged a student once to tell me, there was a paper they had to do on buy-sell decisions. And the question that I asked her to address specifically was, what is the average hold time for commercial real estate assets in this country? There's got to be some information somewhere in there. So she really struggled with this. But she came up with stuff that kind of triangulated to hold periods of between 5 to 7 years. Okay, so that's not answering your question, but I think you can safely assume that most people own an asset for less than 10 years, probably not more, probably closer to 5 to 7. And I also told you before, you probably can't look more than 1.5 years to 2 out the line. So you've got a 4-year window there that you're rolling the dice. Sam.
You mentioned something about that some firms, they go bankrupt to break the leases. And I was a little bit interested in that in the sense of if there's a point where the owners of the lease, the properties can then sue them for saying they're intentionally doing so in order to get out of it, or if it's, or if there are more
We'll talk about
factors to go with
We'll
it.
talk about bankruptcy next week, and I'll tell you, thankfully I don't know a lot about bankruptcy, but I know enough to tell you can't.
Can't fake
What-
bankruptcy?
Well, it's not that, it's there, you go into bankruptcy, and we'll talk about it next week, but the answer is no, when you go into bankruptcy, there's not a whole lot that the landlord can do at that point, in and of himself, okay? Let's just do office really quickly, because we need to move on, okay? Office, I'm just gonna go ahead and jump and you know, just go ahead and jump there and tell you, office happens to have a 15% vacancy across the country, but that's anywhere from sub 5 in the CBD to probably close to 20% in the suburbs, okay? Operating expenses are gonna be $9 for suburban product, but they could be as close to $20 for CBD product, okay? Average rents across the country are 35%, but you know, that's like 50 to 100 in New York and San Francisco, right? You know, major CBDs, and suburban probably closer to 20 to 25, okay? So that's how the average comes out. The office market is a little bit smaller, it's about 4 billion square feet, okay? If we want to know about prices, So the average sales price in this country right now is,
I'm sorry, what does it say under operating expense for office?
$9 for suburban and anywhere close to 20 for CBD buildings, okay? So cap rates in office are about 7% right now. Okay, and so the problem is gonna, you know, that's, again, CBD could be 4, suburban, you know, 8, 8.5, depending on the suburb. And you know, average sales prices are $330 a square foot, but that's, you know, anywhere from $900 in New York and San Francisco to, you know, $120 for suburban office product in, you know, small suburban markets, okay? So that's really a tale of 2 different cities. And suburban is about 2/3 of the market, okay? Only about 1/3 is CBD. Questions on office? I want to throw one last asset class in here that we don't talk a lot about, but we're going to do. I'm definitely going to model. We're going to model a hotel, hospitality, and
It's very operator heavy.
yeah. So the problem with hospitality is that you've got a business within a real estate business, okay? And there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. I just want to just briefly mention, because I want to go into a video at some point on this, and I want you to. There are a few key metrics that are important in hotels. Occupancy, daily room rate, okay, and what's called RevPAR. Okay, so you know, occupancy factors in this country are about 65%. Okay, so people talk about RevPAR. Okay, and RevPAR is revenue per available room night. Revenue per available room night. Okay, daily room rates are about $120 a night. Okay, I don't know if I've got a number for RevPAR. Yeah, $86. Okay, and you can figure out revenue per available room night, right? So you can multiply your average room rate, right, by the number of room nights available by the vacancy to get the revenue per available. RevPAR, R-E-V-P-A-R, RevPAR.
Can you go over those numbers again?
65% occupancy, $120 daily room rate, $86 RevPAR. I just want to throw these concepts out there to you, so when we build a hospitality model, okay, you'll have a little bit of sense. Room rates account for about 75% of the revenue in a hotel, and about 25% come from food and beverage and other items. Okay, and food and beverage in most places breaks even, but it could be a profit center in some full-service hotels. Cap rates here are like close to 10%, okay? This is a very volatile asset class. People talk about price per key here, okay? And in major markets, you know, you could pay $800,000 a key. You know, in South Florida, you're probably paying $500,000, $600,000 a key. You might pay $100,000 in, you know, very small limited service hotels, okay? I think the average in the country I got is, what's the average in the country? $275 actually, okay, if you average everything per key.
Can I ask a quick question before we
Yes.
move on?
Yes, because we're going to move on.
Okay, so what do you think about like when you combine medical with stuff that would consider RevPAR? So like senior living, Alzheimer's care, even drug detoxes or hospitals where people stay overnight. Don't those have like a medical and real estate component?
Medical office is a lot more like office. There is a sort of subclass, if you may, of office, which is medical office. All the care facilities are in a totally different realm, okay?
Yeah.
So all the things you talked about, acute care, rehab, detoxification centers, long-term care facilities, senior housing and all, that's a whole other realm.
Okay.
They do have similarities to hospitality in that there is an operating component and a real estate component. And in most of these cases, you've got operators and you've got real estate owners, okay? They are specialty classes. In particular, so medical office is one realm that is very similar to office and doesn't have the risk. All these other facilities have a huge risk, and in particular, the risk in this country all ties back to reimbursement by insurance companies or by government, Medicare/Medicaid. And so, for all that, there's a lot of risk associated with all those facilities. I mean, I don't know that I've answered your question, but it is a subcategory. But medical office is office. All these other sort of genre, there are some REITs out there that play in both realms, but you tend to have guys that are senior housing guys and acute care type guys, and there's medical office guys, okay?
Okay.
So medical office is, if you drive by the new hospital building on the south end of campus, there's an office tower going up there where the doctors that will work there will have their offices. That's an office complex.
Right.
It just happens to have a medical component, okay? Any questions on any of this stuff? Yes, Judson and then Cole.
Yeah, just real quick, on the hospitality, you know, I know that there's a lot of franchises, like, as far as like Hilton Hotels or Marriott, so a lot of times when you're getting into this, would you say that a majority of if you go down like a hotel stream, is that you're purchasing a hotel, but then realistically the business aspect is already covered by a...
So Judson, there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat, and so you can, and I'll give you, maybe both sort of ends of the spectrum, right, or three different ends of that spectrum. Maybe you as Judson decide to buy the retail bit that Nova has for sale out there by the hospital, and you build a limited service hotel, and you're gonna flag it with like Choice Hotels or Super or Six or whatever, Days Inn, whatever. And so you own the real estate, you operate it, and you pay a fee to a national franchise operation that does reservations for you. So in that case, you're a real estate owner and operator, and you're paying a franchise fee to somebody. That's one model. The other model is you're Hyatt, and you own a building that you operate as a hotel. So you're owner and operator. And then in between that realm, there's all kinds of flavors. There are people that own hotels but don't operate them. They'll hire a management company. That management company does everything and gives them a percentage of the profit. There are guys who own real estate and do a master lease with an operator, and so it's like the operator's hotel, and all you get is a rent. So there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat.
What does that look like, the master lease? Like, how much do they get for just owning the building? Like, in just ballpark, whatever.
I'm gonna give you some homework to do so you can bring it here. Take a look at a couple of the hospitality REITs that are publicly traded. I'm going to tell you to take a look at one that I don't know a whole lot about, but maybe one that might have this kind of product. There's one called Braemar, B-R-A-E-M-E-R. Take a look at Braemar, and there's an affiliate of Braemar called Ashford Hospitality. I think they're out of Atlanta, these guys. One is in like high quality hotels, the other one's like in premium hotels. Pull our supplemental out, or look at a management presentation and see what they tell you about that. Bring it to us next week. I want to learn.
We take a quick break before we jump into the new thing, because I don't want to miss the thing and I need to.
Why don't we, if we take our break, we'll take our break, go through the lecture, do the quiz, and then we're going to go straight to the lecture. But if you guys want to do that, that's fine. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back with diligence, okay? Be back at, 1 second, be back. I will start talking in 7 minutes, at 2:15. The quiz, you came late. If you had, you came late. Yeah, you did, you come late, came late because I already said that. The quiz will be on, what will the quiz be on? It will be on diligence. So reading material and the notes and what we talk about. The in-class quiz will be on
buildings, how much it's here.
Not, we just talked about marketing out. There's a lot, there's a whole course. I used to teach a whole course on diligence, dude.
But there's just so much information to jump on, it gets overwhelming for me.
For everybody. I get tired.
Funny how you were at the boat show, like we were there like 3 days.
And did you buy something at this show?
They had a boat show discount for 1
Yeah, most, yeah, but you know what happens is most people will, if you talk to them, they'll put you on basically their list and you can get whatever specials they have, the manufacturer will typically
Oh,
extend.
yeah.
As long as you do it within a couple of weeks max, you know?
Yeah, we
So
did-
what did you guys get?
We got like a 29 feet cobalt, double engine, yeah.
And where are you gonna keep it?
US Virgin Islands. We have a harbor there.
Okay. And, so let me ask you the question which is critical to ask you, and you probably know the answer to that, I hope. You're gonna keep this on a davit or in a lift or?
We get some, we have the tools to take it out because of the hurricane seasons, but we have basically a harbor that's our private one, so we.
Yeah, but the problem is you bought a Cobalt that has 2 inboard-outboard engines.
Yes.
Okay, so inboard-outboard engines should not stay in the water. And should not stay in the water for very long, like more than a day.
Okay.
Especially in
I know
waters
that,
like
I know
ours,
that we've had
especially.
similar boats, and they have not had issues, but it has taken. the
So,
water
so
for
some people
long.
will tell you, so look, out of the box, people will tell you, no, you should not.
Okay.
And then some people say, ah, it's not that big a deal. I can just tell you from personal experience, because my last boat was an inboard-outboard. And,
I don't personally know much, it was one of my parents taking
no,
care of it.
but here's the problem is, so I eventually got a slip at the yacht club, and so, next to my house, so I started bringing the boat a lot, because I used to have it out of the water. I started bringing the boat a lot, and I'd keep it 2 or 3 days in the water. One, I didn't have the bottom painted, which was an issue. Okay, so I did not, because it was never, but I wanted, the corrosion I wound up getting in the engine,
Yeah,
it was, I mean, it almost cost me money to sell the boat when I sold it.
oh wow.
So, now if you're in the Mediterranean, you can keep an inboard outboard in the water. It's so salty
Yeah,
that shit doesn't grow in it.
it is very salty over here.
It's like here though, it's different, it's like here, trust me.
Okay.
Trust me, I'm just telling you. So find a way to get it out of the water.
Okay,
Davits, a hoist, okay, something, you know, something,
gotcha.
something.
I'll take it.
Just a warning.
I'll pass the message.
Pass the message. Pass the message. And I would, and that's a beautiful boat, okay? They're very well built. But I mean, that's the one thing, that's why I got outboards now. I just, and it used to be people didn't want to buy outboards because,
I'm trying to understand when you say the term inboard, outboard.
so an inboard outboard is a boat that has an engine inside. You want to know about this, don't you? I know you want to know, I
I
know.
think this is only outboard, if I have to be honest. Like,
Is
two
Cobalt
engines.
building, there are 2 outboards?
Yeah, 2 outboards.
You see them?
Yes,
Okay. And you can tilt them up
yes.
out of the water. That's new for Cobalt, because they never built outboards before.
Oh, okay.
So if they're out of the water, perfect, no problem. Just paint the bottom.
Yeah, it's already-
Paint the bottom
We're not
and,
custom designing, it's already been, so we're just
Yeah.
buying one that's already.
but it's probably not bottom painted.
Okay, we'll take a look.
Okay, most boats, 99.9% of boats will not be
My
bottom
head
painted.
is
Now
so
you
full
can
for
get
what
the
you
dealer to
just
bottom
talked
paint
about.
it for you. Bottom painted, take note of what paint they use. Because 2 years from now, when you bottom paint it again, they gotta use the same paint,
I see.
okay? And you need to have somebody, and I'm gonna assume the US Virgin Islands are gonna be very similar to here. If somebody's not cleaning the bottom once a month, you're gonna have a lot of growth on it. It's gonna slow you down. You need,
Jorge Masvidal.
get somebody to bottom paint, bottom clean it every month. I bottom clean mine once a month, and if I really wanted to do it right, I'd try to do it twice a month. The diver says, no, you don't have to do it, but you have to do it. You have to do it. You get a lot of growth.
Got any about the jet skis too? Got two.
I don't know anything about those things.
So what, Masvidal?
And I don't know anything about jet boats
Mellow now?
either, so. No, football's nice. Football's nice. Okay, so I said I would start. Yeah, 37 minutes, and Cole is not back, who was the one who asked for the break. But. Girl?
I'm ready to look out for
Walking around the way.
Thanks, I didn't know that. So what is it? Me?
Trying to kiss me, Cole?
Yeah.
So close, right?
Oh, yeah.
Just throw it. We just grabbed a bunch more food, I wish. Maybe baked ones.
When, when real estate is traded, when real estate comes on the market, it comes in the market in a variety of different ways. The first thing that I want to make sure, and it was a question that somebody asked the other day, when commercial real estate is traded, there's usually no price associated with it. So it's not like a house where you say, oh, we're selling this for so much. People give you a book, and they say, look at this beautiful thing. So I fell in love with this beautiful building in St. Petersburg. I want to walk you through this particular asset, because after I talk about diligence, I want to show you how I address this. I looked at it, I liked it. I looked at it really out of curiosity. And then some guys that I had been working with wanted to buy it, so we kind of made a little run at it. We wound up not getting it, but at least you'll get to see.
Is there a bunch of like hotels around that lake, that little lake? I know where
So
that
this is, there is some hospitality there. It's a,
I know where that is.
it's a submarket called Gateway in St. Petersburg, right across West Shore. So you go across the bridge, and so.
I know exactly where it is.
So you get a beautiful book like this, and you get all kinds of stuff. You get all kinds of disclosures telling you that you shouldn't believe in any of this stuff. You got to do all your own work. Okay, you're going to get a bunch of glossy pictures of the inside and the outside of the building. You can get some property facts. You're going to get an Argus run. Okay, and that Argus run is going to tell you where they think the asset's going to perform. Okay, they're going to talk a little bit about the tenants that are there. Okay, they're going to do a couple of things that are very interesting. You're going to talk about the structure and all that. They're going to talk about, they'll give you a floor plan. They're going to give you something called a stacking plan. And this is very common. And a stacking plan, sometimes you can just do this in Excel, and some people just do it in Excel, Miriam. And they just sort of go up the building. And what you try to do is graphically illustrate who occupies what percentage of the building, how much they pay when they expire. It may be color-coded. Okay, so you can visually in one place see what you're buying. Okay, and ultimately, it's telling you how many square feet and what the rents are and when the lease expires. So all of a sudden you can already get, you're buying cash, man. It's what I said all along. You're buying nothing but cash. Okay, and the lease is ultimately what drives all this cash that you're going to get, right? So that's why this is important, okay? Then you're going to talk about the tenants. this particular, asset had basically all credit tenants, and it's kind of like you could buy the bonds of any of these companies for 4% yield at the time, or you could buy a building that they occupied and get a 7.5% yield, because you can use leverage. So I thought, okay, do I buy the same credit for 4% or do I buy it for 7.5%? And if I lever it more, okay, I might be able to get a higher, return on it. Okay, so now there's a couple other things. So you get something called a rent roll. I'm going to show you the rent roll in a second in a different way. The rent roll is a legal document. The rent roll is a legal document. It details all of the particulars related to the income stream associated with a lease. So when you buy or sell a building, you typically, as a seller, make representations, and you expect, as a buyer, representations from a seller in regards to the accuracy or the veracity of the rent roll. You're going to take a look at the leases, and you're going to read the leases, and you're going to abstract the leases. You're going to abstract the leases. You are going to either do it yourself or hire an attorney to sit and abstract. I forget how you write abstract. Okay, abstract the leases. You're going to take all the key, important, salient facts related to the income stream that you're buying, and you're going to summarize it. And from that abstract, you're going to compare it to the rent roll. Because the rent roll is going to tell you how much space they occupy, when the lease starts, when it ends, when there are bumps, what the bump is to, what kind of TI is still outstanding. And from this, you're going to go to the Argus model. And that Argus model is going to tell you what the NOI that generates. And you're going to take that Argus model and dump it into Excel, and you're going to overlay leverage on it, and you're going to figure out how much you can pay for it, because you know how to use GoalSeek now, or you know how to use Solver. You're going to figure out how much you can pay for it. And then you're going to do data tables, and in those data tables, you're going to do sensitivities on how much leverage do you use, what kind of interest rate can I pay, vacancy, occupancy, operating expenses, and to figure out what kind of project return you're going to get. So you can ultimately come back and say, hey, I'm happy with that IRR, and that cap rate triangulates to what the market is telling me is a fair price to pay. Does that make sense? Rent roll. Rent roll, it's a legal document. It's a critical component of diligence, okay? So then there's a couple other things they're going to give you that are important. You're going to talk. So these are all, they give you an Argus run, and then they give you all the inputs. I'm going to show you something. They give you all the key inputs that you're going to use on Argus. What are your releasing assumptions? What are the market rents? What is the expected market rent growth? What are the operating expenses? What is the expectation in operating expense growth? How much TI do you have to give? What are leasing commissions? What's the probability of renewals? If you don't renew, how much time is the space going to be dark? Okay? Because those of you who've done Argus already understand that all those inputs need to go in to understanding what the cash flow that you're buying looks like. Because no lease goes on in perpetuity. We may use perpetuities to capitalize the terminal value of an asset, but leases are not in perpetuity. Lease is a right to use space for a specific amount of time. For a specific amount of time. So there's always an end date to this stuff. What happens when it ends? Do people renew? Do they release it? How long does it take you to release it? How long is it dark? How much TI do I need to spend? So what are my capital expenditures, right? Related with, what are the typical capital expenditures related with a lease that we need to account for when you come out of NOI? NOI needs to provide for leasing commissions. It needs to provide for tenant improvements. And it needs to provide for recurring CapEx in a building. I'll mention all this again now. Okay? Improvements to the building. But out of your operating cash flow. So we don't deduct depreciation here. But we need to account for leasing commissions, for tenant improvements, okay? And for recurring capital expenditures. Okay? And you also need to build that in to your Argus model. okay? Now you can do that in Excel. This is what your Argus model looks like. Revenue, you don't have to look at it, I'll blow it up bigger now. Revenue, expenses, NOI, capital expenditures, free cash flow. Yes, Miriam?
Using commission and TI is to deduct from the NOI or to calculate it? The TI and LC. You include it to calculate the NOI or?
No, it's below.
Below, huh? Okay.
So, let me blow this up for you.
Yeah, is that like adjusted?
Yeah.
No, no. There's two totally different concepts, okay? So, we'll work on this in the next few weeks as we keep furthering the models, as we overlay leverage, and we talk about capital expenditures. So far in the models that we've built, we've talked about revenues, and we've talked about expenses to get to NOI. Okay, net operating income. We haven't done anything below here yet. But net operating income is not money you put into your pocket. Right? We talked the other day about cash on cash return. Now I haven't brought that back, but it was a concept that I discussed. Cash on cash return was how much cash I ultimately got. But we don't get NOI in our pocket. Okay? If you remember, I made the clarification in the video that I made that I used NOI as a proxy when I calculated cash on cash, but cash on cash is not NOI divided by your equity. Cash on cash is net operating income less capital expenditures less debt service. Because that's the available cash that you have to distribute. So, these CapEx have nothing to do with operating cash flow. This that we've done up to now is operating cash flow. Now we're talking about cash out. So when you looked at the video that I showed this week, I no longer talked about income and expenses. I started talking about sources and uses of funds. Okay? NOI is a source of funds. But then I've got uses of those funds. Okay? I've got capital expenditures, and I've got debt service. Now I got free cash flow to distribute after that. Does that answer the question? Okay.
So the free cash flow would be considered just free cash flow? Like, well, what is that measure? What is that unit or whatever? Because normally you would think that NOI, but then obviously less CapEx, less debt service, then that's considered free cash flow, or is there another word for that?
Well, so the reality is, depending on who you talk to, free cash flow is something totally different. Okay, so if you talk to an accountant, if you talk to a finance professional, if you talk to somebody in the real estate space, they're going to tell you something different. I'm going to tell you that we use NOI for purposes of valuation. So when we talk about cap rate, and we talk about relative valuation, we talk about NOI because we're living in a world, okay, especially, forget CapEx for a second, we're living in a world where especially we're saying we should look at this on an unlevered basis because the capital structure that I bring to a deal is different than the capital structure you bring to a deal, okay? So we measure NOI without debt service because we want to look at it unlevered first, okay? So the first difference that you have is everybody's going to bring a different structure, capital structure to a deal. But you can't eliminate the fact that you've got to contemplate for what you're going to put in your pocket debt service. Notice this says cash flow before debt service and taxes, okay? Let's assume that taxes are irrelevant as well. Let's assume that we're creating some sort of pass-through entity or tax-efficient structure where tax is not an issue. The one common element that all leases have, that all cash flows from leases have is that because of the nature in which the industry works, there are certain periods in time in which there's going to be significant outflows of cash, uses of cash, okay? This all depends on your assumptions as well.
So I assume tenants are gonna renew. I'm not gonna have TI. I'm gonna assume tenants renew. I may have a reduced or no leasing commission, depending on what the structure was in place. Sam's buying the same building, he's assuming that they're not renewing. Juanita's doing it differently, she's assuming there's a 50% probability, which means that half the space is gonna be leased and the other half is gonna stay dark, okay? And so, for purposes of analysis, people use NOI as a metric, but you as an individual owner, if you ultimately want to get to what your cash-on-cash return is, you've got to layer in your CapEx and your debt service based upon your particular assumptions of leverage and of leasing operations to get to a measure of free cash flow which is ultimately going to be theoretically distributable. Okay? Theoretically distributable. Okay? And when I say theoretically distributable, you may have obligations for reserves, you know. You may have a desire to hold on to some cash because, look, one of the deals I'm in, I got no distribution this quarter, and I got pissed. I gotta live, I don't get paid from nobody to live, okay?
The peanut banana from here.
I'm sorry?
The peanuts that you get.
The peanuts that I get from here is just for breakfast, okay?
Oh, okay.
So I didn't get a distribution. I call up, dude, what's up? Well, the problem is, we're gonna have to do signage. So we own part of a center there. We've got a cross-access agreement, and we gotta put money into the road with the tenant, with the landowner next door. And we've got a space that we think is gonna go dark, and we'd rather hold on to the money in case we gotta do TI and leasing commissions, because what we don't wanna do is a capital call later down the line. So, theoretically, that is distributable cash flow, but you may not distribute it all. As a manager, because most managers have some sort of incentive or carried interest to get returns to somewhere, to hurdle somewhere, we haven't talked about waterfalls yet. Managers are going to want to distribute as much as they can out, but that doesn't mean that 100% of free cash flow is going to be distributable. Okay? So, when we overlay some of these things in the next couple of weeks, and we overlay like cash-on-cash return, it's just one other metric to look at. Okay? IRR is a metric. Cap rate is a metric. Cash-on-cash return is a metric. Okay? So these are all inputs that help you make decisions on whether it's worth buying or not. Okay? Did I answer your... Naisha, do you have a question? Okay. And so what else do these people give you here? So, detail of operating expenses. We'll talk about that and the things that we should be doing there. Okay, these are the assumptions that they're using. And then, so then they give you some market data. I'll show you what I did with that, okay? Market data. And they're just gonna, they're selling. They're selling. Anytime that you're talking to somebody, they're selling something. Just like you're selling something. You are always selling something, okay? So they're doing both lease comps and sales comps, okay? And they're talking about the competitive market. Anyway, I'm gonna shut this down for a second because all I wanted to show you is when you're gonna look at an asset, somebody's gonna tell you sell you something and put together a nice slick document. They're not gonna tell you the fleas that the dog has, okay? They are gonna tell you all the nice things and why you should buy it. What's your responsibility as a buyer? Find all the fleas, okay? So that if you still want it after you know what fleas are there, you buy it.
So what were the fleas that you found in that?
I'll tell you there was only one. I'll tell you in a second, okay?
One.
I'll tell you, I'll jump to it. It's a parking issue. So what happened was, so one of the issues that one needs to take a look at when you look at when you're looking at a physical structure,
you look at parking, when you look at it from a physical perspective, you know, does it have to get repaved, does it have to get restriped, what's the drainage like? But you look at it from adequacy, from a compliance perspective with municipalities, but you also need to look at it from a compliance perspective vis-a-vis leases, and then you need to take a look at it from not compliance, but an adequacy perspective as it relates to the market, okay? So, take an office building that has parking of 3 per thousand. The first question you ask yourself is, does that meet code? So that's a diligence question. Does it meet code? Okay, in the city of St. Petersburg, you can have a suburban office building with parking of, 3.1 or 3.0 to 1,000 square feet. Boom, check that box, no problem. What does the market offer? Because if I offer 3, but everybody else offers 5, I'm at a competitive disadvantage. And I'm definitely going to be a competitive disadvantage depending on the type of user that I have. Most office users in a suburban setting require how much parking? Does anybody know? 5. But now you've got, what do you see in a lot of suburban places like here? You see like these Kaplan University and, Evergreen University and...
Wait, what do you mean 5? Like
Yeah,
5
5
parking space, yeah, what is that?
5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet leased.
Gotcha.
Okay, so, or if you've got a call center, if you've got a Delta call center or something like, how much parking do those people suck up? Those people suck up 8, 9, 10. Medical, I went to the dentist this week. There, he's in a medical office building that we'd actually built some years ago. There's no parking. Why? What old people do? They go to the doctor every day. Okay? I mean, it's what keeps them busy. So there's no parking. So, I mean, that thing's parked 5 to 1,000, per 1,000, but there's no parking. Now, if you go like at 7 o'clock at night, there's parking, but not during the day. Okay, so adequacy is and then the third one is when you look at all the leases and you abstract them, then the question is how many parking spaces have you offered or guaranteed all the tenants, and how many parking spaces do you have? And that was a problem that these people had. They didn't promise more parking spaces than they had. They had a word-of-mouth agreement with a hotel next door that people could just park there. But then what started happening was the hotel was starting to have events, and when they had events, they wouldn't let anybody from the office building park there. So, that causes a problem. So how do you solve that? You've promised people something. They've got employees that they got to park, right? So how do you solve that, right? And so then there's a cost associated with that. So you either got to pay the hotel, which impacts your NOI, or you got to have a valet service and shuttle people up, in and out, right? Or because the tenant's going to hold your feet to the fire. You promised it. So how do you deliver? So that was an issue there. Okay, so parking is an important. The book. I'm not going to mention. Look, chapters 8 and 12. I'm not really going to go over that much. Chapter 12 really talks about diligence at an entity level, and I don't know that we need to. So if you're doing diligence on an asset, just have to think that if you're actually buying a company that has multiple assets, in addition to the asset, you've got to do diligence on the entity. You need to understand the G&A structure there. So you need to understand what income structure there might be, but more importantly, what expense structure there is in place that's going to impact your NOI. Okay? And there's a whole series of legal questions related to buying an entity as opposed to an asset. What tax or litigation liabilities you might be carrying over and things like that. But I'm going to break chapter 7 down in a sort of different way in a second, and I sent you the list. But so, the book talks about, what are you doing? You're gathering information to make an intelligent or an informed decision, right? You want to find the fleas in the dog. You don't want to be surprised. If you find things that you don't like, you at least want to be able to address them. When you find something you don't like in a diligence process, what do?
Negotiate.
You can walk away. Typically, you could say, this isn't what I thought it was. I don't want it. I'm not going to buy it, right?
or you can find a way to mitigate that. Now, you might be able to mitigate it by affecting the purchase price or some of the conditions. Give you a simple example. I want to buy this building. I send a third-party engineering firm to do a structural review. They find that the roof needs to be replaced. It's going to cost $5 million. I go to the seller and say, listen, this guy says I need a $5 million roof. He goes, gets his engineer. And the guy comes back and goes, no, you don't really have to replace all of it. You know, you can patch this stuff here. It's $3 million. Okay, well then, you know, I mean, you got to do it regardless, right? Even your engineer told you that. So, give me $3 million. So, now, the decision might be at the point the seller might say, not interested. You know, I'll just hold on to the building. Okay, it may not be economical for them, but typically you can walk away, or you can find a way to mitigate the risk. Okay, or live with it. Understand that you've got the risk. Okay, you know, the book talks about title, survey, environmental, legal. I've broken all that out separately. The concepts don't change. I sent you 5 different diligence checklists from different people that have different perspectives and objectives. The goal is for you to create your own. So ultimately, as I said in the foreword, in the, you know, the introduction to that, at the end of the day, not any transaction is identical to any other one. So what do you need to do? You need to figure out what it is that, you know, what risks do you have, and tailor the procedures that you're going to undertake to the particular situation that you have. Do you have more financial risk? Focus your procedures on that. Are you more concerned about the ground and environmental? I'm buying a dry cleaner. Darn, I better be concerned about environmental risks and concerns, you know? I'm buying a gas station site. Did it have underwater tanks? Was there leaking? Is there contaminated soil there? That's probably more of a concern to me than, you know, looking at a, you know, zoning compliance or something. I'm not saying not to do one, but one's going to have more risk. So you got to tailor them. So I'm going to give you my thinking. The author's giving you, you know, his thought, okay? The author talks very much about understanding revenues, expenses, and capital expenditures. We just went through that, okay? What's the income stream? What's my expense structure in place? And what capital expenditures am I going to make along the way that are going to impact the NOI that I make, okay? At the end of the day, this is like buying a bond that has an expense structure. A lease is like a bond in the sense that it's producing current income to me, okay? So, what's going to take from that income to ultimately affect the cash that I put into my pocket, okay?
Sir, I know you emailed these slides, but how do you put it on the screen?
No.
Okay.
No. No. Okay, because then people are listening, people look at the screen, so. Loans, I'll talk about debt in a second, but you know, I want to talk about what the author talked about. Debt may be assumable or not. It's going to have covenants, whether it's new or not. Somebody asked me earlier what an equity kicker was. I want to make sure that everybody knows what an equity kicker is. It's a profit participation that a lender would have in a loan agreement. You don't see a lot of those. But people say, okay, I'll give you this loan. I'm going to charge you 8%, plus I get 20% of the profits. And what I said, that was very prevalent in the 80s. I really haven't seen a lot of that since. Okay, there was a big S&L crisis in the late 80s. A lot of the S&Ls were doing this kind of, you know, real estate, you know, financing structure. You saw some of this in the workouts in the 2008, after 2008 financial meltdown. There were a lot of like, sort of like A and B notes where the restructuring of debt included a full repayment under an A note and then some sort of profit participation with a B note, assuming that certain thresholds were met. And then prepayment penalties. Did you guys talk about that with Dr. Forgy?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he talked about defeasance and yield maintenance, and so you guys are comfortable with all those concepts. I don't need to repeat those? Okay. A lender bunch of risks being a creditor, okay? A lot of risks. Probably the most important one is repayment risk. I loan you money, you don't pay me back. That's probably the worst risk. But there's a bunch of other risks, okay? One of the risks is called interest rate risk or reinvestment risk. Interest or reinvestment risk, okay? And so here's the following. I loan you money at 10% for a mortgage. Why would you repay me early?
Because you wanna save on the interest.
So, which implies what?
There's a better.
Interest rates went down, now I can go and borrow the money at a lower amount and pay me.
Financing.
So I loaned you the money at 10,
Right,
interest rates go down to 8. Now I made a commitment to you, I made a promise to you,
right,
like a marriage.
right.
Here's money for 10%, and now you're divorcing me. And you're giving me money back, but I can only reinvest it now at 8%.
Okay.
Who got the short end of that stick?
You-
Because I have to match. So what happens is, again, I don't want to get into what leads this, but if you look at the balance sheet of most creditors, right, a bank, their liabilities are who? Us, depositors. They're making promises. I do a 5-year CD with this guy at a fixed rate. Now he can make a loan at a fixed amount to somebody else, right? Right? But if you pay me back, I still have to pay that old amount to this guy. So now the lender is shortchanged. So how do you mitigate all this? If you're a lender, how do you mitigate all this? You mitigate it with, no, fees aren't enough. You get what's called call protection, okay? Or you build call protection, okay, into, so a call is that, you know, you can make a call. You can preemptively pay off the debt. Home mortgages in this country are totally, you know, have no call provisions. You can prepay a mortgage whenever you want. No cost associated with it. But in the commercial realm, those are big slugs of money that a lot of times have some sort of matching associated with it. Most institutional debt of any fixed nature, any fixed rate debt in this country, okay? Just about any fixed rate debt on commercial real estate, which is going to come from a life insurance company, okay? Or it's going to come from some sort of conduit, some sort of, you know, commercial mortgage-backed security, is going to have call protection built in. And that's going to come in a variety of different layers. The first one is, it's going to be, there's probably going to be some sort of lockout period. What's a lockout period?
You can't
Pay
prepay at a certain point.
No prepayment. You cannot prepay. So, I mean, these might go out as long as 24 months. So you bought something, you're stuck with it for at least 2 months. I mean 2 months, 2 years. You cannot prepay the loan. Yes, Andrew?
So would they have a lockout period and then would they hit you with a prepayment penalty as well if you?
Oh yeah. So the first layer of call protection is a lockout period. Okay? Second layer is going to come in the way of a prepayment penalty, and that's going to come in 3 different flavors, okay? Take your pick. Now take your pick. The reality is that there's, so less sophisticated lenders, okay, are going to give you some sort of percentage. You know, if you prepay in the first year, it's a 5% penalty. If you prepay in the second year, it's a 4% penalty, or whatever, okay? Up until the 5th year, and then there's no prepayment. That's one way to do that, okay? Some people do that. You might see that kind of prepayment penalty from banks. Our condo association is doing a bunch of concrete work. A bunch of the owners couldn't pay. The condo association took a loan, a 10-year loan out on behalf of the owners that couldn't pay it. And so there's no lockout period there, but there's a prepayment penalty, and it's exactly this: 5% if you prepay the first year, 4% if you prepay the second year, and so on down the line. Okay, until the 5th year, and then you can prepay after the 6th year. Okay, so that's a simple way. What was very prevalent for a long time is what was called yield maintenance. And what's yield maintenance? Did you talk about that? I thought you guys talked about this. Kind of talked about it.
I know how to do it in a calculator. what I'm talking about.
Whenever you ask us about it, do we know it, it's just assume it's no.
Okay, now, so there was a bunch of people in this class, and I think they told me they were doing, I thought they told me they were doing this earlier today. Okay, so yield maintenance basically says, if I was paying you 10%, and the prevailing interest rate today is less than 10%, I'm gonna make good on the difference for the balance of the term that I prepaid. Okay? So I loaned you money at 10% for 10 years. In year 2, you borrow money at 8%, because that's what I can reinvest it at now too, right? And you still owe me, just for argument's sake, 80% of the loan. You, at the time of prepaying me, are also going to make a payment to make up for that 2% that I'm losing for the next 8 years. That's yield maintenance.
Is that spoken up front, or is that just happening?
No, that's part of the agreement. Yeah, that's in it. That's in the loan.
So like on the
Is it still
refinance?
worth it to refinance?
Well, so if, from a residential perspective, this isn't an issue because loans don't have call protection. From a commercial perspective, these type of agreements a lot of times do not make it worthwhile to sell because of the cost associated with the early prepayment. So the benefit of a fixed rate is that you know what the rate is.
Ahead of time.
And somebody's committing to you. They're marrying you with that rate. But they're going to ask you to love me forever and ever. Just that day. Okay? You're going to love me forever and ever. Okay? So you got to figure that out. The guy I talked to this week. They're looking at another retail deal. And the play is, we're going to buy, it's a grocery anchored center. There's a big out parcel. It's a CVS. And what they think they can do is carve out the CVS and sell it as a triple net lease to somebody. Take that money, pay down part of the loan, hold the thing 2 or 3 years, and sell it. So he says, we're going to get variable rate loan. You know, because one, we don't see interest rates going up high, but number 2, this is not a long-term hold for us. So we're not going to get this because then it's going to potentially be prohibitive to sell it. Now, you know, can interest rates go any lower? I don't know. But I've been wrong on that for 10 years. So, yeah, they're lower in Europe now. So yes, they can go lower, okay? Now, the most modern iteration of all of this is what's called defeasance. So what you tend to see now with this kind of debt is defeasance, okay?
So the variable doesn't have yield maintenance?
I'm sorry?
The variable doesn't have the yield maintenance?
So typically, variable rate loans don't have call protection because from a matching perspective, the lender is not necessarily blocked. So listen, this is an old rule of thumb because this whole financial intermediation process is all whack now, right? But typically, short-term loans were financed with short-term liabilities at a bank, right? So short-term deposits would finance short-term loans. So short-term loans, things like working capital loans, things like that, those would be variable interest rate in nature. They would be fully prepayable, right? You know, nothing associated. Long-term loans would be matched with some sort of fixed long-term obligation, a CD or something like that at the bank, or even a note issuance or something, and it would be backed with some long-term loan, like a mortgage, okay? And so you typically don't see in the variable rate loans call protection, so they would typically be freely prepayable, okay? Now, defeasance is the sort of flavor of the month now. Did you guys go over defeasance?
No.
I thought you guys said you did. Okay, so defeasance is kind of like yield maintenance, but it's a little bit more complicated. Defeasance says, okay, you got to do this. You got to make me whole, but I don't want the money. I don't want the money. You can't pay me off because I don't know what to do with it.
Like you can't pay me off because I don't know what to do with it, but do you mean the money, like it gets paid off?
Yeah, I don't want your money. I don't want your money. I want the cash stream that you promised me. I mean, like a very demanding spouse, okay? You said you'd love me in sickness and, health. Okay, so you agreed to make 120 payments, right? Of X, right? You agreed to that, right, Jonathan?
Yes.
Okay, so in month 24, after the lockout period, you say, okay, I want to start paying you off. I want to say, well, but I'm short 2% on all of these. Well, yeah, but don't give me the money now. I want you to create a trust, and I want you to put into that trust T-bills that have exactly the same maturity as payment 25, 26, all the way down to 120. So that as they mature, you make those payments to me. So I still want the next 84 payments, or 96 payments, exactly when they were due. And so what you do is you go out there, there's a couple companies out there like the Fees or Ross or something like that, okay? And they'll go out there, they'll identify strips, treasury strips of treasury securities with the exact face value that you need, with the exact maturity that you need. And when they'll release the mortgage subject to this trust. And then this trust exists, there's a cost associated with that, which you got to pay up front. And then as the T-bills mature, they make the payments.
So if the company get their money, well, the interest.
Yeah, so the difference between these two is that here you pay me now, here is at the time of closing, the money's got to come out, okay? But it doesn't go to the lender. It goes into an intermediary that holds risk-free securities that pays off in the sequence and in the timing in which it was going to be paid off.
But the actual, the person who got loaned the money has to pay for the fees of the defeasement company? Because that would be inherently decreasing
Listen,
your return.
the lender doesn't care how you do it or where you do it, they just want to see their payment. So the
Right, but I'm
answer
saying like
is
they wouldn't count the fees out of your return.
The borrower is the one who has to go through the cost of
Right.
hiring this trust company that would manage the defeasance, that would then hire an auditor to certify that in fact these T-bills will meet all these obligations, okay? And then once it's all set up, they manage that as they collect, they also pay.
Is that because the interest is compounding?
No, it's just because they don't, in a lot of cases, this is because it's securitized mortgage loans, right? And these things trade in a marketplace, so they trade over the counter. So you don't know who's holding this paper. So the trustee here just says, look, I don't want to be bothered with this. I got to send monthly payments out for the next 96 months. Just send it to me, and I'll distribute it. I don't want a capital gains on this year.
Right.
I want current income the next 9 years. I don't want a big capital gain this year. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why this is set up.
You get a big capital gain if I pay the yield.
If you pay the yield maintenance or the defeasance amount up front, like, I don't want to be bothered with that. That's not what I needed.
Right.
I'm a fixed income investor. This is the stream that I matched for. That's what I want when I want it. Yes, Sam?
You guys are good there.
Okay?
I was just trying to understand that when the person offered to pay the full sum, was that with the understanding that you would also pay for the additional interests that would come with it?
There's no additional interest.
Well, the 2% interest, like.
Well, you have to build, right. So you're building this ladder of T-bills to match the exact payment amount, that monthly constant that you've got for month 25, month 26, month 27, month 28, all the way through month 96.
I understand that. I also understand that he doesn't want a full sum of money. I just wanted to understand that in that situation, if you were to theoretically try to offer that as an alternative to pay the full sum of money, then it's not just the money owed, but you have to account for the interest that you would have paid for each month so that they would still gain that incentive.
Well, there's present value
Okay.
built into all this, so you're paying for it at the present value. Okay, all these T-bills have a future value, or these strips have a future value. You're paying the present value today, so in theory, the interest or the time value of money is calculated into this.
Okay.
Now, you can offer to avoid defeasance, but the reality is you are not going to avoid defeasance. Because the problem, another problem that you have with, if I have a problem at a bank, I have an officer I can go talk to. If I have a problem with a securitized loan, who do I go talk to?
San Miguel.
No, you don't go talk to San Miguel. You go to talk to the special servicer. Okay? And a special servicer has different financial interests in this than I do. Okay? And you're not going to get anything past. We're going to say, what does the bond indenture say? That you have to defease this? Defease it. And you just paid $50,000 of attorneys. I need more time. No. I want to share with you I want to share two slides that I've had in different presentations here. One was from a previous instructor in a program who's on our board. And he made a whole presentation on problems that he'd had with diligence. But he summarized it at the beginning by saying, and these were his big things, okay? If I'm buying a development, if I'm buying into an active development as opposed to an income-producing property, his question is title. He had big problems with title. He brought several examples where, and I didn't think that existed in this country, but that there were deficiencies with title. People didn't have the real rights to convey title. There were defects in the title. There were easements that weren't recorded, etc. Okay, and so it's the first slide after the sort of addendum that says typical due diligence. Okay, so are there any restrictions on the property? Are there any easements? So I'm buying property that has deed restrictions. I can't ever build whatever here. I don't know. The people that developed Key Biscayne deeded a piece of land to the Archdiocese to build a Catholic church, and to the Presbyteria of South Florida to build a Presbyterian church, and to the Episcopal Archdiocese to build a church. Those properties all have deed restrictions, which say you can't have anything other than a church, place of worship here. When Mr. Matheson donated Crandon Park to the county government. Kenny, thank you. When Matheson donated the Crandon Park to Key Biscayne, donated in exchange for the county building a bridge into Key Biscayne, they put a deed restriction on it. So you can't have money-making facilities there. So when the tennis tournament was there, and it was a money-making venture, all of a sudden the Matheson said, wait a minute, there's a deed restriction here that says you can't have a money-making event here. Now, I don't know why they haven't said you can't have a golf course or a marina, and then there were softball fields at the beach, and they said, no, this is a passive park, and softball is an active activity. So they got rid of the ball fields. So those deed restrictions come back and bite you later on. So, are they disclosed? Are they known? Okay? Real estate taxes, are they delinquent? Again, this was another issue that he had. There's always going to be an impact on real estate taxes after a purchase. So how do you account for that? Prorations are part of a real estate closing process, right? So how do you account? And real estate taxes are paid at the end of a year, right? So how do you account for that? There's going to be an increase. There's going to be an increase in value. So you got to negotiate these things, okay? Utility. So you can see from a development perspective, and in development, there's potentially huge value creation from when you take raw land to an entitled use, okay? Utility availability and changes or charges. So classic thing. Go try to build something in Lakeland today. They don't have the water capacity to do it. So they're going to come and say to you, oh, you want to build this? It's going to consume, how many square feet do you want to build? Oh, we don't have capacity at the water plant. You got to buy a water plant for us. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but that's the way it is. Try having built in Hialeah 8 or 9 years ago until they finally expanded the water facility there. We have no capacity. It's a different thought. It jumps to wetlands. Try to build in Broward County today, impacting wetlands. You can't even buy from a mitigation bank anywhere. So You may buy land, it may be developable, but you may not be able to get around what you need from a regulatory perspective in order to develop. There were water and sewer moratoriums in Dade County in the early 2000s as well. So, you know, you couldn't build because the water and sewer plant couldn't process. Okay, so what's that? Entitlements. You know, and that's the classic one. What rights do I have? What can I build here? So, again, you guys have a whole class on that. That's a little bit outside my realm, which brings up the point that I wanted to bring. In diligence, it is impossible to think that you can do it, Isabel, that you can do it all on your own. Okay? It is of utmost importance to hire professionals that are experts in their field. Okay? You may be very good financially, and you may say, look, I don't need to hire somebody. I can do the Argus runs, you know. I can take leases and abstract them myself. I've got the time to do it. I've got the knowledge to do it. You might say, I've got really good in-house counsel that's really good with regulatory matters. Great. But you're likely not going to have counsel that can look at title for you, for example. You're probably going to want to rely on external counsel anyway for regulatory, you know, advice, okay? You may want to get an attorney, a junior attorney, to look at the leases and abstract them for you, because you probably don't have the time to do it, and you want to make sure that you understand all of the terms associated with it. You may have a surveyor on your team, but he probably can't give you the proper survey that you need. Okay, so the advice here is find the best professional that you can, and rely on them. Tell them your objective you're trying to meet, and let them poke holes in your argument. At the end of the day, if they poke holes, a lot of people, a lot of service professionals will look at a diligence assignment as an opportunity to torpedo or derail a transaction. Let that be the case. Let them come with that perspective in mind. Because if you can get past their objections, it means that you've got something good. If people come to you and say, you got this problem, and this problem, and you can mitigate them all, then you're good. Okay? You know, a very big one, soils and geological, a very big one here in Florida, okay? Wetland, water. You saw in Florida how much, you know, and if you look at the state, other than Orlando, there's not a lot of development in the middle. There's a lot of reasons for that, okay? It's agricultural land that has higher value or higher valuation for agricultural purposes, but also water and water flow, all the way from the center, from the whole sort of Kissimmee River all the way through Lake Okeechobee, and all the way down, you know, has an impact. So, and environmental, you know, every day. You know, what were the previous uses here? I was reading an article in the journal, the daily that I look at in Barcelona every day, and there's a part of the city where they're uncovering stuff from like the 16 and 1700s. It's not even that old, but they're discovering the uses that were. And that stuff's all been covered, right? So we know South Florida's not 300 years old. But as recently as 5 or 6 years ago, a guy tried to build a tower at the mouth of the Miami River and couldn't do it because there was a Tequesta burial ground there. And the guy that was developing the mat downtown had to waste 2 years because they found the remnants of what? It wasn't a cemetery. It was the Royal Palm Hotel, which was the original hotel that Henry Flagler built when he brought the railroad to Miami. And so there were all the remnants were there, and there was all kinds of, like, you know, ceramics. And so they said, whoa, stop. Immediately the city came in and said, stop, no development. Stop, no more excavating. We need to send archaeologists in here, you know, to look. Okay, so anything. And then you look at stuff, not everything underground belongs to you. Most states reserve mineral rights. Most
depends
countries.
what they find.
Sorry?
It depends what they find.
Well, but most states, in the state of Florida, by default, most deeds, and you may know, most deeds have, Isabel, listen to this because it's important. In the state of Florida, most deeds can be, you know, can only be conveyed with the state of Florida retaining mineral rights. Now, they may waive those if there's no reason to believe that there's something of value underneath, but that means the state reserves the right to any oil or gas or gold or rock that there is there. Yes, sir.
It's not like that. Sorry.
I think most jurisdictions throughout the world are like that,
Yeah.
okay?
So there was something that was interesting in like Oregon, and I think it may happen in other places where the states will say that the rainwater is not theirs to collect, and if you have any kind of a rain basin, they'll actually put you in jail for collecting it, even though it falls from the sky and it's on your property, because somehow that's the state's water. Makes no
Yeah,
sense.
so,
Because they want you to pay for it.
thankfully, we don't have those kind of water
But
issues
isn't that like
here.
ridiculous though?
But stop to think, all over the western part of this country, there's issues with water rights. Not only in this country, I'm gonna tell you about another example that came out this week, but, so water, I mean, it's stuff that goes back to the Roman times. Water collects here and works its way down, right? So who's entitled to the water? The guy that's closest to the stream, you know, to the upstream, or the guy at the bottom? And what happens is the guy at the bottom is saying, I'm as entitled to this guy. I'm just not as proximate to it, right? And so, you know, you've got this problem in California where people are saying, people in California say, hey, we want this water, but people upstream in, you know, Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado are using the water, okay? There was an issue, you guys saw the massacre on Monday in Mexico, the 3 Mormon families? So they don't know what it was. You know, the government came out and said it was mistaken identity, but one of the relatives came out and said, we're having problems here with some of the neighbors because they're saying that we're using too much water for our peanuts and pecans or walnut, you know, trees or something. So water rights are a huge problem. And I don't know anything about that, and we don't thankfully see
No,
that
I mean
here.
that's a good explanation. I feel like what I just said.
But it's been, and I know that in Europe, I know in Spain there are these water dikes underneath the water, underneath the land that run, and it's just south of Barcelona, that run from the mountains all the way down towards the Mediterranean, and the land is valuable to the extent that you've got one of these things coming into your property. Because if you don't have water. It's very arid terrain. So, yeah, I mean, you got to understand all that, okay?
Can you buy water rights as like a private investor? Like, how do you do that?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure that, I don't know that there's there's no public market for that, okay? I mean, I know there's stuff like mitigation banks. And in fact, you know, one of the things that we've got, I'm on the investment committee at my old university, and we're looking at right now a private equity fund which it buys mitigation farms or banks. You know, they'll buy land that's desirable for, you know, by water management districts or other conservation agencies. And then they'll sell credits to developers that are impacting wetlands on their site. So you know how that works? Or, okay, I'm not a developer, but, so I want to build a dorm over there, but there's some, so I want to build over there. You want to build something, I mean, help me out, guys that are developers, you got to call the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Okay, and then you got to call your local water management district, which here is the South Florida Water Management District. Okay, you got to call engineers from these guys. And they may give you different stories, okay? But they're going to come and say, well, you know what, there's a small little tributary from the Okafanufi River that ultimately feeds to the New River that you didn't know anything about, but you're impacting 2 acres of wetlands here. And you're like, no, that's just mosquitoes and stuff there. No, it's wetlands, and they're highly valuable. And since you're impacting them, you have to mitigate that on site. So number one, first line of defense is you can remediate some other wetlands that you have on site that may be damaged. And they'll tell you how many credits you need to do, okay? Or you could just go off-site and buy mitigation credits. So off-site, like for instance, FP&L did this some years ago, but that doesn't, FP&L went and bought a big chunk of the whole of the donut in the Everglades. You know, one of the, I don't know if it was the Everglades, somebody wanted a piece of land in FP&L because they had a bunch of personal issues, went out there and bought these, whatever, 750,000 acres and put it in a conservancy. But they only needed like 400,000. So for the next few years,
to developers, they were selling off credits, you know, these other $200,000 or $350,000 credits that they had, right? To recoup part of the cost of that. So now, what did the state get? They got their 750,000 acre hole in the donut, right? They got the conservancy they wanted, and the developers got to build because they were able to impact wetlands, but replace them somewhere else. Yes,
So
Chase?
the people that they sold it to, they're still conserving the land, but they're just obviously transferring the credit. But like they're not building and developing that
Here,
land.
no, this is conservancy.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, for the
So there's a
states
private
themselves,
equity group out there, there's a couple of them that buy these things and then just sell them to developers.
And you can do those carbon credits and stuff too, right?
I think, yeah, I don't know much about that,
Like
but yeah,
manufacturing
that's,
plants trade carbon credits.
that's a whole sort of evolving thing.
Could you combine that with like the opportunity zone thing, like taking tax deferred money, buying wetlands, and then selling off those wetlands credits?
I like the way you think, John.
I don't know how to answer that, I don't know.
You're just giving.
It sounds like it's a little bit too much spring damage at 3:15, we're way behind.
Okay.
Probably not. In income properties, when we're buying an asset, we're looking at something different, right? Ultimately, we're concerned about, so we're concerned about the physical structure, but ultimately, we're concerned about the income stream, okay? And so we're gonna take a look at a lot of the same things. We're gonna look at entitlements, we're gonna look at compliance with local laws, you know, we're gonna look at taxation, we're gonna look at environmental, we're gonna take a look at structural efficiency. I'll go through the steps, I'll go through, we'll look at parking and all that. But we're really more concerned about the income stream. That really is, you know, so I'm buying cash and I'm paying cash for it. So what I wanna know is what's good. Next page, a friend of mine came here, he does acquisitions for a private equity group, and he kind of, one of the checklists that I sent you is actually his checklist, okay? He kind of started by saying, look, I look at things in 4 different ways. I look at economic, I look at physical, I look at legal, then I look at market. Okay? So that's just the way he thinks. I'm not saying he's right or wrong, it's the way he thinks. So he broke up economic as, what are the leases? And I put the note down underneath, he was very adamant on understanding the lease structures that were in place. What are the lease structures that are in place? Okay, so, and let me sort of caveat that by saying, ideally, you walk into a building or you walk into an environment where there's one lease form. So you've had one owner, there's one lease form, and all the tenants have a lease that pretty much conforms to that form. What happens in reality? I own a building, I have 50 tenants. Is every lease identical? Probably not. What's more complicated? I own a building and I sold it to Ramon. So out of the 50 tenants that are here, 20 of them still have my form lease. When Ramon bought the building, his attorney said, that form lease isn't any good. You need to use mine. Pay me, and we got a new form lease. And now he signed 10 more leases and he sold the building to John. And John was an attorney, said, now these form leases stink. I want to have my own form lease. And now the other 20 tenants that are there have his form lease. And to make matters worse, the market changed in the middle, and it used to be an industrial gross, you know, market, and all of a sudden it became a triple net market. And so you've got leases that have, you know, expense stops and base years and others that don't. Okay? So you need to understand what that lease structure looks like. Okay? And so that's going back to abstracting why looking at the leases and understanding the income stream that you're entitled to is critical. Okay? He talked about operating expenses. So ultimately he gets to what's my NOI? What's my income? What are my expenses? What's my NOI? That's his economic. Physical. What's above the ground? What's below the ground? What's my structure look like? What's my subterranean look like? Okay? And this guy's he's always been a replacement cost guy. You know, his argument is always, I'm buying this below replacement cost. Smart guy. He talks about legal. PSA. What's PSA?
Public service announcement.
I was gonna say that.
purchase and sale agreement. Or APA, what's APA? Asset purchase agreement.
Thinking of how to write an essay, here's that.
Yeah.
PSA style, no, PSA style is not PSA style here. PSA is purchase sale agreement, okay? Title and survey, zoning and easements, and then he got into markets, and he talked about lease and the leasing like we talked about. What's the competitive lease environment look like? What's the sales environment look like? Okay? What's my IRR structure look like? What's my cap rate structure look like? Okay? But San Miguel gives you a different perspective. No, that's not more steps. It's the same steps, just broken out in different ways, okay? So I'm not going to write them because I sent these out to you, and hopefully you've printed them, right? So I put them either in my, what I think is most important, but it's also timing, okay? So revenues, that's number one. You got to understand the leases, okay? You've got to understand the leases, okay? You got to talk to the tenants, okay? You got to talk to the tenants. You got to talk to the leasing agent, okay? You got to understand what's happening there. What's their intention? Are they going to stay? Are they going to renew? Are they leaving? Are they happy? Are they unhappy? Okay? Do they think they've got options? What's their home office telling them? Okay? You need to understand the market. You need to understand what's happening outside your building. What is the overall market doing? What is my specific competitive set doing? Okay? And what does the sales market look like? Physical. I put third party first. You got to hire a consultant to do this. Now, in most buildings today, what happens in most institutional sales today is the seller will go on ahead and do this up front. Not only are they going to paint and spray for the fleas, they're going to go out there and hire a surveyor, they're going to hire a structural engineering firm, they're going to hire an environmental engineering firm, and they're going to give you in the data room all these reports. And you're going to have access to them. And if you ultimately prevail and are going to buy it, you're going to be able to get that consultant for an endorsement fee to issue that report to you. Now, that doesn't mean it's always like that. You may need to go and get your own structural engineer to go and take a look at it. But these are areas where you need professionals to come in. And there are certain companies out there that will come in and will do all of this for you. Okay, so when you look, I'll show you when you go through structural, what are the things you want to take a look at, okay?
What was MPE again?
Mechanical, plumbing, and electrical systems, okay? You want to look at parking, and then you want to look environmental, below ground. I put phase 1 and phase 2. I might as well just jump into that. MEPs or MP, mechanical, plumbing, and electrical.
What's the one? MAP?
Just a different order.
Different order.
MEP.
Oh,
It says A, I said an A now.
Just all this mechanical. electrical.
Gotcha.
Okay? So all the mechanical systems, escalators, elevators, okay? All the electrical, okay? And all the plumbing, okay?
Phase 1 and 2. Yeah.
Yeah, so you typically do a phase 1. What's a phase 1 environmental report?
Like surface level maybe?
It's a very basic, more than surface, it's very basic. You come in and inspect the site, you'll talk to local management, and you'll go to the local regulatory agency if there's anything on file for the property or for the adjacent properties. Okay? Now that may say, listen, we have record that there was an underwater tank here. Okay, what do we do? Well, so the logical, well, you can walk away, you could say, hey, I'm not interested in this. Or you could do a phase 2, and a phase 2 might entail sampling of water.
Excavating?
Well, no, you wouldn't excavate the tank. You would do soil samples, you would do water samples. Okay, so you would do samples to try to gauge a sense for what it may cost to remediate that. So once you get to phase 2, what's a logical thing that you would do?
renegotiate the contract?
Well, you can walk away, just follow the argument.
Always
You
walk
could
away.
walk away first and say this is too much brain damage, or you could say, what's the cost? Can I split it? Can I get it from him? Is it viable? And do I want to deal with it, right? I mean, do I want to have, water recirculation tanks going through, pumps going through here, paying for this forever? So it could all be worked out, but there's always a cost associated with it, okay? You want to take a look at operations. And operations, to some extent, are very tied to your operating expenses, okay? So if I've got revenues, operations to me are the expenses. So what's the expense structure in place? Can I save money on it? Am I happy with the providers? Am I happy with the contracts? Okay? And I'll go through all the key components, but I can give you examples. I'm going to have to bring in my insurance policy. What's the incremental cost going to be, right? Am I happy with this property manager? Am I happy with these employees here? Okay, what do I do? Okay, legal. So PSA, you looked at that, title, survey, and then I want to say compliance in general. So compliance with, are all occupational permits in place? Are the uses on site permitted?
Yes,
We own an industrial building, and we're selling it. And one of the things that comes out during the buyer's due diligence is that there's a hardware store, and it's an industrial park. And so we had bought this from an institution, and this hardware store had been there since like 1978. So they said, well, you're doing retail business here. How did you get an occupational permit to do this? And the guy says, well, we don't really have an occupational permit to do retail sales here. Well, how do you operate? He goes, well, we opened up. He said, when we opened up, the way we got our certificate of occupancy was the county came in and said, as long as, less than 30% or some number, they use some number, less than, whatever percent of your total sales are over the counter, you can do some retail sales, as long as it's not, primary. Well, do you have that in writing? No. And his tenant was like 30% of the park. Well, we wound up selling it. The people wound up buying the story, but there was no firm documentation that there was a permitted use, in that particular site. So, so compliance in general. Debt, do we assume, or do we have to find new debt? So how do we arm the public? And I say debt, it could be equity. Because ultimately, as a developer, you're typically going to bring in some sort of institutional partnerships. You're not just looking for debt, you're looking for capital. You're looking for equity partner, and you're looking for debt on the asset. And then, closing. You got to get your investment committee. Somebody's got to give you permission to do this. Everybody's got a boss. Okay, so if you're in a formal environment, you're in a public company, there's probably some sort of very structured investment package that one needs to put together. Okay, if it's a smaller business, maybe you just have to go to your father and show him what you're buying. Your mother or your brothers. Okay, and say, hey, there's the reason to buy this, okay? So, then there's a whole closing process, and to get to closing, there's a whole bunch of documents. There's like a legal track to that, and there's a financial track to that. And those of you who had my accounting class know how to do a closing statement, a commercial closing statement. Why are you laughing, Juliana? Wasn't it like your favorite assignment? It was not, okay. We're not going to do a closing statement here, but a commercial closing is very intricate. It's not like what used to be the HUD 1, whatever it's called, closing statement now or whatever, where it's just sort of like a form and everybody knows what goes. It's like a free-for-all. There's no sort of mandated thing to do. Miriam's laughing too. But I'm going to show you the solutions to that. So, okay, so what do you do? What do you do?
What do you do, like, after all those checklists are done?
No, hold on a second. No, these are the checklists. Sorry, I need to take a break too.
Yeah, no, we figured we're fine.
Break number two.
Yeah.
That was a short
Yeah,
break.
you've been going.
You missed a part of the class where I said I have pneumonia, so I'm actually pretty tired right now. So.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Oh,
It's okay.
congrats.
Yeah, I have pneumonia.
How you?
It's a viral infection I have,
That's like a problem.
Did you watch the videos and notice me coughing and saying stupid things the other day?
Are we all infected?
No, you're not
I
infected.
did notice that.
I watched the video and I just had an asthma that was really bad the other day, so anyway. But I've got pills now.
You
So.
wouldn't tell because you dress your usual self.
I dressed my usual self.
I mean, no, not dress. You are your usual self. Like
Okay, hold on, I just
going-
need to take a break.
Yes.
Does that extend to us?
Yeah, can we go to the restroom real quick? Please?
I'll start in at number 7, so you can do whatever you want to do for the next 5 minutes.
Okay.
You're okay? Just okay? Is this a lot of information?
It is a lot of information.
It is, isn't it? I go home and say, how did we cover all this?
I'm exhausted.
Well, when I leave here, my brain is just like,
It's dead?
yeah.
I eat a lot of food and took a nap.
I go home, these days I've been going to my mom's house on Saturdays after here.
I should do that one.
And I just, I literally, I don't even talk to her. I mean, I sit there, no, I just sit there, I put a football game on, and a little bit, she plays her game and stuff,
I
so.
like college politics.
I had to
It's all over the place.
What have you learned? I mean, look at your phone. Like, it's a knowledge. It's a secret with your information. You just do. I don't even know how his wife, if he has any kids, anything. So what you learn? What have you learned?
Hmm?
You learn.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah,
To most people, bitch is
It's not bad.
He said this quiz counts for 2.
No, it doesn't count for 2. I think last week the assignment counted for both the quiz and the assignment.
Okay.
So this one's normal.
Normal. What does triple N stand for? Net lease?
Triple net lease.
Triple net lease, but what was the NNN that he said? He said something.
I don't know if it stands for anything.
He sent it to me on email, yeah. It's a lot.
They probably have something on the glass.
No, I don't think it stands for anything. No, barely. Yeah. Just the amortization stuff.
Are we gonna have time to look at that?
They separated it.
What time is it? It's 3:30, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Are we going to do any Excel assignment?
I don't think so, I think we're just gonna do this.
The quiz and then do the assignment, but I didn't understand the last video. You went so fast. And then video for 24 minutes. I'm just
Yeah, I know, you had to rewind and watch it. This was not sitting on like this. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh.
Are you talking about like just the numbers on the side or like everything? Oh, the
Yeah, because if they're being, you're right, because the part that you're breaking out is because the part that touches your face. You're right. Definitely. You can take it off yourself. Actually, I'm always so sick of my hair. And I
Where are they coming?
of course you got, yes, you cut a hole.
How'd you engineer that?
That's my hair.
Okay, we're back.
It's the engineering.
We're back. Hello, we're here. Okay, so, under the first, which is what I called revenue, or, you know, ultimately I talk about leases. You wanna meet with the tenants. You wanna interview the leasing agent or the broker that's in charge of the property, Juliana. You want to know what their perspective is on the market. You know, where do they lose deals? Why do they lose deals? What are the tenants telling them? You want to interview the guy because you might want to keep him. Is he the right leasing agent for the, you know, and you might think in multifamily there might be in-house leasing agents, but in commercial assets, there's, you know, offices and retail, there's somebody else. There'll be an extra CBRE, JLL, Cushman, you know, whoever, okay? And so who's the right guy, Colliers, who's the right guy, you know, for me? You want to take a look at the contracts that they have. Typically, property management and leasing contracts, you can typically, you know, terminate without any sort of, you know, problem. You're typically going to have to honor any leasing commissions that may be due for any deals that are in process, okay? So the guy's already working on a lease, you're going to have to honor his, you know, commission, even if you wind up terminating him or her and bringing a new brokerage firm in. You're going to want to walk all the spaces so you really want to kind of do full inclusion and full. You want to make sure that you understand what all these spaces have, whether they're leased or not. In the case study that I used to use for the closing statement, it was a real life deal that I had done, and there was a tenant that leased 30,000 square feet, but they only occupied like 5. And so, well, because they had leased the space knowing they were going to expand relatively rapidly. And so 25,000 square feet were dark. So we knew that, and there was no problem with that. Now, later on we found out, and we got an estoppel letter, okay? But we ultimately found out that there were promises to have, you know, TI done on those 25,000 square feet of dark space. It wasn't built out, you know, it was first generation. And, you know, there were, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of space, you know, of costs that were going to be incurred. So you got to walk the spaces, you know, what kind of conditions in it, okay? Talk to the people. Yes, Chase.
When you talk about estoppel letters, that's really just, like, you're asking the tenant specifically, if it's a multi-unit, you're asking each individual tenant to provide proof of payment for their rent so you can authorize or, I guess, you know, ensure that the landlord is telling you the correct amounts they're paying.
Kind of like a payoff letter. You order an estoppel to know like what's left on the mortgage.
It's funny, one of my nephews called me today and he said, they called me, yo, what's an estoppel letter? And I said, okay, who's it coming from? He goes, it's from a condo association. I said, okay. I said, I will talk about this. So there's different estoppel letters that you'll come across in real estate. From a lender, you're typically concerned with payoff information, okay? So typically you're going to ask a lender to give you an estoppel letter that says if I'm going to sell the property, to prepay it or to pay it off, how much do I owe? And how much interest is it daily if I miss that particular day, okay? From a condo association, you're typically concerned with assessments, okay? So you're going to be concerned with whether the owner of the unit is paying assessments.
Or like HOA.
HOA?
From a homeowners association.
Is that what you mean by assessment, or like what do you mean by assessment?
No, when you're saying an assessment, so you have a monthly operating assessment typically in most condos, but sometimes there are special assessments. So for example, in the condo that we have, so we've got I live in a condo complex where there's 60 units, okay?
45 of the unit owners decided to borrow $1.25 million to pay it off over 10 years, okay? Before they can sell their unit, the condo, the homeowners association, tells the prospective buyer that these 45 owners still have a proportionate share of that loan that they need to pay off, okay? In addition to that, we haven't finished the work, we've got another phase we've got to go. So the condo will say, in addition to that, we're expecting another assessment of approximately this, or once it's assessed but not collected, it might say, plus there's an outstanding assessment of so much per unit. So yes, your monthly assessments for operations are this, but there are these special assessments either outstanding or due, or to be due. And in the context of a lease, what you're looking for are terms, conditions, and compliance. I'm going to tell you one other thing is, you're going to look for validation, okay? So, I'm going to tell you all commercial leases, you have an obligation as a tenant to provide an estoppel letter when you are required to do so. So if you're a tenant, and your landlord asks you to provide an estoppel letter, and it's typically attached as a form to the lease, they will say you will provide this estoppel letter. So then you get into all these, discussions with during the purchase sale agreement. What's the form of the estoppel going to look like? Are the tenants going to give it to me? Are all the tenants, to your question, are all the tenants going to give it to me? Where you ultimately wind up is you wind up with some sort of negotiation on either a certain percentage of the lease stream or tenants, and you may specifically ask for including certain specific tenants. Okay, so you might say, look, I'll take estoppels from 75% of the tenants, but they have to include Juanita, because I need to know. And so when I say that they talk about validation, I want them to tell me, yes, this is the lease that it's effective. Why do you say that? Okay, well, the case I just talked about, the TI that had been promised, was on an amendment that we didn't have. So we had last abstracted amendment number 3 to the lease, and there was actually an amendment number 4 that the seller did not give to us. Now, in their defense, they weren't trying to to steal from us. No, because ultimately they're the ones that came back and said, look, we're going to send you an estoppel letter we got from our tenant, and geez, included in the data room, you didn't have the last amendment to the lease. So, and it wasn't noted on the rent roll, so we know we didn't have to negotiate. We know we're going to take, whatever, $100,000 off the purchase price because we know we owe you that.
So if they do something, like it seems like an estoppel letter is just like a due diligence, and obviously in and of itself. But if you find out that it's not what they told you up front, is there some kind of legal ramifications you can take for them misrepresenting the data to an investor?
Well, that's why you're doing diligence.
Right. But I mean,
So
they're
that's why
telling
you
you
want
like
to know
we're
this
getting these
before.
rents, and
You
they're
want this
blatantly.
before you close. You want before you close. In fact, before you enter into a PSA, or really more importantly, before you go hard, before your earnest money deposit goes hard, you have to clear this threshold. Because at that point, you got no leverage. Okay? And so, you want to know that you're looking at the right lease, but you want to know the terms of that. Okay? You want to know the rates, you want to know the bumps, you want to know the rights that they have to expand, to contract, okay? Okay, so all the conditions. And you want to know that the landlord is in compliance. How did you find out about the parking problem? A tenant wrote it in an estoppel letter. The landlord's not fulfilling their obligation.
So it's actually coming from
It's coming from the tenant.
Like they have to prepare that, or like?
Under the lease, under any commercial lease, correct? You're an attorney. Under any commercial lease agreement in this country, you will find that as a tenant, you will have an obligation to fill out an estoppel letter whenever you're requested to do so. Now, dude, this is hurting cats. I mean,
I sold the building, we had, I don't know, probably 70, 80 tenants between some office and industrial. It was a mixed-use place. And we had really good relationship with all our tenants. I mean, it was like a family. And we struggled to get 60% of the estoppel letters. Part of the problem. Oh, okay, so one of them was L'Oreal, the company. So, well, locally, they wouldn't do the estoppel letters. They had to get somebody in France to do it because it was a corporate thing. Try getting an estoppel letter from somebody in France. And in a time frame that you need. Didn't happen, you know, so this is always a problem, but it's critical. Because this tells you whether that income stream is what's been represented to you in a rent roll and in an Argus model. Okay? And in leases that somebody says to you, this is the valid lease. Now you got a tenant saying, the lease dated so-and-so date, up to amendment number 4, the dated so-and-so date, are what's legally binding on me. Okay? And yes, the landlord has fulfilled all their obligations. And they don't owe me anything. Okay?
Who do you send the estoppel letter to?
Who do you? Who is you?
The seller.
No, the seller. So the seller's going to get it, and they're going to give it to the buyer.
Okay, buyer.
So the buyer's going to get it ultimately. Okay. You want to do credit reviews. So why do you want to do credit reviews? We talked about credit ratings before, right?
Per tenant credit reviews?
Well, I mean, to the extent that you can, yeah. I mean,
Commercial,
so
not residential. Right, you're not gonna run credit checks on 200
well,
people.
you're not going to do that, right? But you may come in and ask the leasing agent or the management office, say, what kind of credit check do you do on the tenants that you have here? So you're not going to spend the money to rerun that on a residential complex, but you're going to want to know what kind of credit you're buying. So you're going to say, what do? Right? You may not on a commercial deal do a credit check on all of the tenants that are there, but you're going to ask the question of the incumbent manager, what credit assessment do you have? So we had some excess land in this asset that I told you. So our development guys wanted to sell. There was an RFP that came around town for Delta. And Delta wanted to build a reservation center. They had one in Coral Gables at the time, and they thought that, you know, they put an RFP out, and our development guys, they just wanted the fees, personally, is what they were trying to shoehorn this into our site. It made no sense, but they kept thinking that. So Prudential was our partner, our institutional partner, and they own 95% of the deal. We own 5%. So, you know, I had a conversation with a guy at Prudential one day. Early on, I'm relatively new in the industry, and he says to me, I said, look, our development guys want to follow this RFP, and you know, they're putting all this work in. And he's like, well, why are they doing that? And I said, I mean, it's Delta. I mean, it's, you know, it's a big transaction, you know. He says, well, have you looked at the credit on that? I said, no, but I mean, it's Delta. I mean, sounds good, you know. I mean, it's. And he said, well, why don't you take a look at the credit on that? And then started getting concerned, and you know, 3-4 years later,